at lunch. We are live. We are live. This is Senate Finance. We are starting a few minutes early so that we can hear proposed amendments. I believe these are all to miscellaneous tax, which is on the floor tomorrow. So Senator Brennan, you got here first, so the floor is yours.
Thank you. For the record, Senator Pat Brennan, Grand Isle County. I have an amendment here today that I don't know if you had copies yesterday. I have some if you have them.
I think we did. They were mostly deletes, so
That's it. Pretty straightforward.
now tell us what you deleted.
So I'm deleting in H 933 sections 21, 22, and 23, which essentially, in short order, restores the Fish and Wildlife Department's ability to set fees through rulemaking. And that's the crux of it. And the reason I bring this is they were granted authority in, I think, 2005, and they've done a pretty good job with it. In this, in sections 21 through 23, they are restricted to basically rulemaking authority only to the Green Mountain Conservation Camp and long-term licenses for limited uses, which I believe if you were going to take away rulemaking authority, I kind of question why you would leave those two open. And I'm guessing the reason is because legislation, I don't know how to put this and be kind about it, but I think we don't quite understand, we wouldn't understand how to legislate through fee, I guess establishing fees through legislation for those two particular things is a little bit beyond our purview. And I personally trust the department to understand what they need and how they need to implement rulemaking through access areas. They've done a pretty good job of it in the past. They proposed moderate fees and quite frankly, they probably, we all know how cash-strapped Fish and Wildlife Department is. So I think they've done a pretty good job managing those access areas. And they've held off establishing these fees on kayaks, canoes, and non motorized vehicles and so forth. People that don't actually buy a fishing license, and they've held off for years. And I think the time has come with the financial situation that they're in to establish those fees. And I can tell you, I personally witnessed. I live about a half a mile from a fairly large access area, and I have a boat, and I've put in there many times, and it can be quite congested with folks that aren't paying fees. And I'm guessing they're using it the majority of the time because it's there and it's available and it's free of charge for them. But I don't think it would be a burden on those folks to pay a modest fee to rent. I
think the argument that we heard is its separation of powers. The executive body does not have the power to set taxes. Fees are a tax, like tariffs. And there have been a couple of instances where the executive department has stepped over, one being the establishment of the I Am Vermont Strong or We Are Vermont Strong license plate, which established a fee and then appropriated the fee. all of which are legislative prerogatives. I don't know what the situation was when in 2005, when they got permission to set, but that to me was more like rent. It's for facilities that they use. This is a very new fee. It's gotten the public very upset because it didn't say, I stand in the little parking lot and look at the looms. Do I need a permit to do that? It was being interpreted as yes, to access that boat launch. And I put my kayak in. And if you told me I had to register my kayak and make sure it was all clean from all the things you don't want me transporting in and out of different lakes. But fees basically have to go through the legislature. No other department can just institute a fee or raise a fee. And they've gotten caught. So that's been the argument on this side.
I see. Yeah, and I, when I go back to 2005, I will confess, I don't know the circumstances. I don't know if we legislated that and said, here, this is in your purview. You are now in charge of setting fees, or they asked to be granted the permission by rule to set fees.
They probably did because we are in session in July, and if
Right.
you got a rock concert that wanted to be located on their land, they couldn't go to us, and they didn't want to give them a $20 a night fee. So, but it is a different, and the money's in the budget. They're being held harmless. The
I
money
understand.
they were
This
going
year.
to get, and so if they just bring the fee in next year, they'll get the fee, and this year they're getting cash. So,
Understood.
You
Go ahead.
go ahead.
Oh, okay. I just know from my point of view on these fees, it was a concern of mine with the access fees. Then how does that work? Because there's not always somebody at the access fee. I think that's what caused the whole consternation of this whole entire thing. And would that mean we need more parks attendants or access attendants, whatever it may be?
Yeah.
And does it actually outpace the fee that we established for that? So that's where my concern was in the bill. I didn't have any concern with what the department did with the other fees that were there before, because I think for the past 20 years, it's worked fine. It's just that access fee. Is there any way that the amendment could just get at what their fees are, less like an access fee not included? Is there a realm for that? So they get all the authority they have,
we
but
used
no
to do a
access fees.
fee bill, and the administration ended it, but we used to review fees every 3
Yeah.
years. It was a revolving cycle. Because they're only supposed to cover the cost of the service. So all Vermonters shouldn't pay for the state parks if the all Vermonters don't get to use the state park. Or the big one is actually 50 fees, which are really high,
Right,
because
but
everyone doesn't use them.
yeah, and you know what the department had before for all their fees, I think was working. And that's where
Yeah.
the access fees was the part I didn't like. And is there any way that we can get to the point where they keep the authority they had before,
My
but not
understanding
the
is
access
they
stuff?
have-
They do, exactly.
have-
That was my,
All their stuff.
Yeah.
so the department does not set hunting and fishing fees. Those we do. Most fees we do set, even for them. What this was this broad authority for fees for the use of lands, roads, building, and other property. That is what the bill, the miscellaneous tax bill takes out. But it does allow them to retain the ability to set fees for the tuition of the Green Mountain Conservation Camps and for the long-term use of the lands for research activities. So yeah, so I mean, it still allows them to set fees and tuition for certain things. It's just the broader, like, creating a new fee to use the land is not something that they can do. And as the chair said, they can come back and give us a report about what they
Well,
need.
it says next year they should
Yeah,
come back.
exactly.
Or fee increase request or a new fee request.
Right, so this is not really taking away that much authority. It's just saying you can't come up with a new fee for the use of the land. And it retains their authority to set these other things, and their other fees, their big fees, which are their hunting and fishing fees and trapping fees and stuff. We set those anyway.
And it's revenue
trying to-
declining. That's the base problem.
Right, and I mean, I think we need to look at their fees overall, so next year would be a good opportunity for the legislature to do that and see, if they're.
So I guess what I'm hearing here is, I hear you. Would there, I do have I'm hearing here that, maybe there's a willingness to go back to what we had to begin with, other than the access areas. So I guess what I would propose as a substitute amendment to that would be to restore, the ability to set fees by rulemaking other than for access areas, which is where we were
I think you
prior.
might get
No,
to
it's not.
maintain your ability to set the rent for the cabins. But other than access areas is a little broad. I think right now, everyone, I thought this was just restoring the status quo. And we'll have to talk to Michael O'Grady about that. That's probably who you should talk to. Make sure if this bill is taking away something that presently happens, like setting the conservation camp rent, then I think I'm hearing a willingness.
It does, I mean, it specifically says they can do. that.
Yeah. So but any new fee, whether it involves access or not, would need to come through the legislature. The constitutional provision. Even the president got shot on that.
Okay, well, I can talk to Mike.
There may be some wiggle room, but
I do have an alternative, proposal here, but I think I would like to run it by Mike again.
Yeah,
Just to make
just
sure.
make
it
sure what it's doing.
Addresses your concerns, yes.
Okay,
Great,
okay,
thank you.
okay, thank you.
Yep.
We're running just a little late. Somehow miscellaneous taxes bringing out amendments.
A lot in there. Sure.
Oh, there's been more in miscellaneous tax. It's, welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair.
And have you got,
Yep, so you've had it emailed to you, and I think,
Okay.
I don't know if Charlotte posted on the website or not. I didn't bring printed copies, but I think most people have their laptops out.
it's been emailed to everyone.
I had sent it to you and
Did you send it to Charlotte?
I did send it to Charlotte.
Okay, is it
I
posted?
posted it.
It is posted, see?
Yeah,
That is good.
Yesterday or no?
it is a slightly updated one, same content.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Senate Finance. I really appreciate you taking the time this afternoon. The reason I introduced this amendment was because the way that we have limited the ability of municipalities to respond to financial challenges in their communities is causing a crisis. I know that in towns that I represent, whether or not they have a local option tax, they are struggling to maintain positions, keep staff on, and to afford basic things, whether that be road maintenance or keeping a paid staff member in their town administrative role. So the reason I introduced this amendment was that I know that even a tiny amount of money can be the difference between small towns having the ability to keep staff or keep the lights on, literally and figuratively. So the purpose of this amendment is to increase from the 75-25 split, which currently exists for the pilot
We just did last year.
with the local option taxes, to increase that split to 80-20. So 5% more than we did last year. The reason I think that's an appropriate move, well, I'll start from my point of view, which is I think they should get 100% of it. I think if you pass a local option tax, besides administrative costs, that the state should not take a portion of that, because I think that you have earned.
Don't know how hard we fought.
Sure, and I'm just kind of sharing my perspective as, you know, a select board member who went through that process, and
I was the mayor who set up that process.
that's awesome, yeah. So I think that what we're seeing now is that towns aren't getting enough financial support from the state to function, so they're moving towards the local option tax. Even in places that might not have previously considered it, because they're trying to keep their own property taxes down. So to move to the 80% is an attempt to support that and to lower local property taxes, and to actually have the local option tax be more meaningful for those towns. So we know that since last year, when the state increased from 75 to 25%, we know that there were 21 new local option taxes that were approved in 13 municipalities. So we see this is growing. And what's interesting about this year's debate around the pilot fund is it's kind of our only surplus that seems to be, you know, the crabs are pulling at. And that money has been used by the state of Vermont just over the tune of $10 million for other purposes.
They've been given. There are other purposes that go to the municipalities. There's
Not like $10 million.
was an increase in the per parcel fee that goes to the towns, and then the proposal, and it's in both the budget and miscellaneous, is that I believe transportation is looking at 3 million.
Yep, we
A
just passed
year.
that on the floor.
Yeah.
So
And
this
that goes to every town. The 80% just goes to the 30 largest towns, really, that bring in the bulk of the revenue.
Yeah, and I think you can actually do both. So that's what I'm hoping to do with this construct, is not to disrupt, you know, I voted for the T-bill, I worked on the T-bill. I think it should have that $3 million and the construct they created move forward to support those towns. I think we actually have an opportunity to eat our cake and have it too, or whatever the saying is, because we can, with a healthy surplus, be able to transition to an 80-20 split, in my view, while maintaining that surplus. So the amendment that you see before you doesn't have a trigger. It just immediately goes to 80-20 this year. But I do have, obviously, this has been a point of lots of conversation, because the Vermont League of
Was that
Cities and
voted down?
Towns.
Yes.
No,
You vote on that?
you didn't vote on this.
Okay.
This is the first time you're hearing this.
Okay.
It's
So
part of
this-
the Budget discussion.
Yeah, it was part of the budget discussion. Yes, sir.
Oh, okay. Okay, then maybe you did vote on it. I apologize.
I
I don't know.
It was a
Not-
question on the.
I
There was a
know,
question.
I know it
There was
was,
something.
it was
Yeah.
discussed.
Yeah,
Oh, okay. Well, this proposal, does not have a trigger in it. One of the conversations that's come up amongst members, who feel that they would like to support this, want to support their towns, or hearing from their towns, that having, some guarantee that we would not be draining the pilot fund and causing any financial problems there. The compromise that we've discussed, or I've discussed with those members, would be to have a trigger of 18 million of surplus in the fund before we went to an 80-20 split. So guaranteeing that before we move to an 80-20 split, we had the money to do so. So I have in front of you, that's the amendment without the trigger, but I wanted to make sure you knew that I was open to negotiation when it comes to the emotion around that.
I think at the end of the day today, if joint fiscal could help us take a look at that trigger, and I think the balance, no one wants to hoard money that could go back to the town.
Yes.
However, the argument has always been that you're just charging me to shop in your town. It has been very difficult. My former seatmate here was very adamant that the people from Orange County shouldn't be paying extra to shop in Montpelier. I told him fine. When he had a heart attack on my streets, I'd ask him for an ID to make sure that he had been paying for that service, which was the other argument that there are 20,000, there used to be when state employees were here, 20,000 people in this city during the day, and there were 8,000 people here at night, and that's people, not households. So you had a small number of people paying for a level of service that they didn't need. And so that's where pilot came from. If you have a town forest, you've got pilot payments. But if you had the state capitol or university or a salt shed, you didn't. We were trying to get it back to everyone. So anyone that has any state non-tax paying facility in their town, which is almost all of them, can share in pilot disbursement. But you want to make sure, because we've got two things. More towns are passing a lot to options, but whether or not those are big towns, because they're getting 80% of their payment in back. 80% of $1,000 isn't a whole lot of money for a small town. On the other hand, local roads goes out to every town. So
Yeah, you can do both with my amendment.
if you, yeah, and that's what we need to make sure is that the fund stays healthy. The other thing that's going on is the national economy and consumer confidence. And if anything happens at that level, which is more or less likely every day, gas went up 3 cents between Sunday and Monday in Montpelier. I should have gotten gas on Sunday because it was 3 cents more expensive on Tuesday. Groceries go up every week. That's, so when do people stop buying other things? That's, I think, another thing we're watching. All right, I've got Senator Hardy, Senator Chittenden, Senator Gill. And then we're getting on, continue this discussion.
And this is maybe a question for JFO, if they're gonna come back with to later. I mean, I appreciate the conversation. I mean, I think most of us, although I'm not sure if all of us, but I certainly do have towns who are pilot towns and then towns who are pilot receivers who get payments from the state. And then some who are neither.
Right.
And
I think we all do.
probably, although I'm not sure about the Chittenden County districts, I'm not sure. So, but there were many, many years when the towns that had state lands in them didn't actually get the full pilot payments. So they were getting, not what they should have been receiving.
There were years with nobody.
Exactly. So I'm concerned about those towns too, and not getting what they need. And I'm worried about the health of the fund. So in the future, if there isn't sufficient funding, or maybe we should relook at what those towns are getting and maybe I don't know exactly how that works. And so that's my question is, my 3 big towns get the pilot, get the local options tax, but I have a lot of little towns and forests in it that get, so how is that determined?
You mentioned Chittenden County. When we started all of this, the city of Burlington, and somewhere I read Rutland, do they pay into pilot because they have their own authority to raise taxes on places of victual? So they were not in, so I don't know if they're, do you know?
They are not.
They are not.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that one of the things
No,
that is a
that is
concern to
right.
me is this
We will,
making sure that all towns, because right now, if we do this, it would benefit the towns that have the local option tax, but other towns might not get as
Yeah.
much. I don't know how
They
it
would
all
get the
works,
same,
but.
they would get the same in the amendment. They wouldn't get less.
Well, for years, they got nothing. And so like, how do we?
Yeah.
Make them whole?
so we will schedule this continued discussion after we finish all the other work on our calendar, because we are now behind. And I think we have a heavy agenda today, and I want to give joint fiscal time to look at the proposals and the calculations and check out, because I've got dueling opinions as to whether or not Burlington is paying in.
Yeah, Madam Chair, for the joint fiscal, just to add a little clarity, the local gross receipts taxes that Rutland City and Burlington levy, they stay locally, but if there is a 1% local option tax under the state's regulatory framework,
Right.
like for sales and stuff like that, that comes.
Okay, so it's only,
75
it's only rooms and meals.
They have those gross receipts taxes in those two
Okay,
particular charters.
okay, so,
Very quickly, I just want to say
Well, then
thank
I
you
gotta
for
look at
raising
it.
this. I really appreciate this because I served on city council for 8 years and I definitely think that the towns that choose to tax themselves should retain as much of this as possible. So I support the 80-20 because of what we're seeing more towns generating more of this revenue with online sales. It's just the right thing to do. I don't support giving 100%. The pilot fund makes a lot of sense, but this is the right conversation to have. So thank you for raising the
thank you.
I also support it. Thank you very much. I heard from my towns and they are enthusiastically in support. So thanks.
I thought you had a question.
They will be enthusiastically support until the fund goes.
Exactly, and
That's
it's
the
not
thing.
all towns, it's just the towns, it's not the small rural towns, it's not.
I have
like-
one quick. One quick one.
Yep.
You had the $18 million trigger
Yeah.
in the
that's-
fund,
Who's in-
what
okay,
happens,
Let's go.
goes over 18, and then it goes back below, does it revert back to 75%, or does it?
Oh, in the draft amendment, which you have not seen with that information, it doesn't revert back. But we had not contemplated that.
Okay, we're gonna have to,
Well, I
what
really,
happens when it drops?
sure, and I just really appreciate you taking the time. I mean, I have all of the towns that we've discussed, whether they be pilot recipients, lot recipients. And I think the bottom line is our towns are struggling. And even $50,000, like what would happen to the town of Brattleboro if we pass this amendment, would make a big difference. So I appreciate your time. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Trust me, I pay taxes and I'll give you. But if we can figure out what
And they've been
might
looking,
be a safe level. To, and if it drops below that, what happens?
Yeah, I can tell you right now, Madam Chair, it's really difficult for us to do a long-term projection on the pilot fund until we know what towns decide to do at town meeting day, and it's very specific, and that's when we revise our projections.
Okay,
As this committee knows, the 10-year or the consensus revenue forecast, it only goes out 5 years also.
Yeah.
I can tell you that by looking at what we know now with the towns that have already done local option taxes at the last town meeting day and the expenses that are in the FY 27 budget construct, we expect FY 27 and FY 28, the fund would end each of those years with a fund balance in excess of 10 million. It'd be like in that neighborhood. I couldn't tell you when you were
Yeah.
at 18 million, but it would be out here.
okay, so another question would be, what's the safe level? Okay, we're gonna move on. Ellen's here. This should take 2 minutes. This is 7:10, which we thought we were voting out of here 3 weeks ago, and then we had testimony on a Friday. And that there was a citing issue in Bennington. That sounds like it's been very difficult. It's very aggressive, it sounds like, person in this. we were then told that those are standard offer programs at 710 only affect net metering. It has been asked that Natural Resources take a look at it. And I've told the committee, I've agreed that we will send it over there. We need to vote it out in order to send it with our report attached. And at this point, we haven't done anything to the first section. I believe, if I'm getting everything straight, that the PUC, I think, asked to have language added about decommissioning. And I was told last week, the week before, it's running together, that an agreement had been reached between the industry and the PUC, and that there was language available. So, am I correct in what I'm remembering? And do you have the language?
Ellen Tchaikovsky, Office of Legislative Counsel. I cannot confirm or deny if any agreement has been reached. I did draft language related to decommissioning based on the PUC's recommended language. So I'm not sure. You haven't seen it or discussed it, I don't think.
We saw some language when they were in.
Okay.
I have a visualization of what it looked like. So, but I know that the discussion was there should be a decommissioning fund, and I think that's what happens if the owner is out of country, even if they go bankrupt and the state of Vermont gets stuck with 20 acres of obsolete scrap metal or plastic. So that was, I think, the question.
Yes.
So tell us what you have, and then we'll.
Sure. Charlotte, I think I sent it.
I saw there's
On
something
March-
on the website, so I assume you did.
No, April 16th. Let me see so I did not know we were asking for an amendment today. I drafted the amendment, but I didn't know if you were going to take it up today.
Chair, may I ask a question? So I hear you say that whatever we do with it today, it's gonna go to Natural Resources next.
Yes.
Okay. Do we want to just vote it out without recommendation and then just give it to?
No. What was with that?
We're gonna get crazy.
I like that.
And then they can do all the work.
Well, we have a bill in front of us, and we have not made any changes or seriously discussed making any changes, which is if you put two, am I correct, they're net metering sites next to each other. You do not have to do a second driveway and a second transmission line for the second field. Unless you can't use the first, but it should be a rule that each one had to have a second. The decommissioning was brought up. And we can send that next door and just vote this bill out as it's come to us, which might be the easiest way to kick that can down the road. So right now, we have the bill as it came to us, and that is on the website. And okay, so Ellen,
Yes, so officially I haven't given you any amendment. So,
Okay.
You haven't made any changes, as you just said, to the single plant aspect. It does apply to things other than net metering. It does apply to standard offer, if that was one of the questions.
it does.
Yes.
But I,
Okay,
hadn't sent a draft of the decommissioning language to Charlotte, now, but I don't think I ever did.
at this point, we have so much on our, so many people here. I think it might be safer just to vote it out as is and send it to natural resources. Would that help?
I'm not ready to support the bill, so if you do call it for vote today, it might be a no, a soft no. I'm just worried of what this might do to that Bennington project where it seems like the community has already voted multiple times. They don't want solar panels there, and this reopens that conversation. I don't know if I want solar panels there. It just looks like that's a better place for housing or otherwise development. So when I go about this right now, I'm a no, but if there's votes, it's a quiet no.
Well, this just says they don't have to put up 2 driveways, and I think one of those driveways went through a neighborhood, but we need to release this bill to get it to natural resources.
That was a no recommendation.
Well, if we vote no, it's dead.
Or you can just release it.
We
and
can
have
just
it
release
without
it.
us voting on it.
Okay,
Do that.
so if we don't,
Make a motion on the floor to have it.
I have the motion, I've had it for over a week.
Let's do the
Oh,
motion.
In the
Yeah,
pile.
I'm kind of, I don't know exactly how I feel about the bill yet, so
Yeah.
I'm like, no.
Okay, this says appearing on the calendar for
Natural
notice.
resources to figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, I don't
So
know. I don't know.
to get another, all right.
Lots of-
Then are we agreed that we will just send this to natural resources?
Sounds like a good idea.
Okay, that's done. Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you.
And we'll have to get a new script for upstairs. Okay. Now, we are only 10 minutes behind now. And we are a very committed. We are going back to 585 for any of you that don't remember that. That is our omnibus health insurance, all kinds of bills. Okay, so Kai,
Thank you.
this is our health insurance bills.
You're behind, so I'll get right to it. Commissioner Kai Sampson, DFR. Thanks for giving me the time to come back and provide some more context, detail, and motivation, particularly around the proposal in 585 to have 2 appointed members to Blue Cross Blue Shield board, or as it's strictly written, the board nonprofit medical service providers, of which Blue Cross is our only one currently. I watched the testimony after the fact that the healthcare advocate gave on this. It raised a lot of questions, such as where was DFR? Why does DFR want this? Where were they during the financial challenges of Blue Cross, which I think you all are very much aware of that. So I thought it would be helpful and to explain what DFR's role is, what the Green Mountain Care Board's role is, and I sensed a bit of implied disappointment that maybe we hadn't acted appropriately in terms of we're not acted actively, and or skepticism that we would be asking for board appointees because we don't have enough power, etc. So I'm going to address some of that. So first, the source of the challenges for Blue Cross during a 3-year period, their surplus dropped over 107 million. That does not include the surplus note they received, so it doesn't. It would be, they restored it with 30 million of it with a surplus note from the state of Michigan. So that essentially brought in as a context to that, using 107 million with a starting point of 135 million surplus. Insurers, so that's dramatic and catastrophic loss of reserves surplus. The reason insurers need surplus is because when we are looking at rates, when they're filing rates next week or the week thereafter, they will file 2027 rates with the Green Mountain Care Board using claims data from 2025. So think of that lag, and maybe they update it to January, February, trailing 12 months. You get an actuary here, but there's inherent and material uncertainty in rates. And the sooner we make those deadlines for filing, the more uncertainty there is. So, and with any insurance product, which is the basis of how we regulate, we understand that they make money, lose money, get rich or go bankrupt based on what actually happens on those rates. So a big contributor was what we call underwriting, gain or loss. That's how you build surplus. That's how you lose surplus. They also had a pension fund loss, north of 20 million. That was a little earlier, 21, 22, I believe, which was largely recovered. During their recovery of some of the underwriting losses, they were able to recoup almost all, if not all of that. And they had excessive losses in Medicare Advantage, which now they have removed themselves from that line of business. That was 50 million plus in it, total loss to Blue Cross Blue Shield of the month. So an interesting commonality between the losses in the qualified health plans of since inception. So 2014 was when Vermont Health applied. Blue Cross Blue Shield cumulative, so including their good years and their bad years, has lost $80 million on the QHP over 11 years. So that has not been a profitable line of business for them. In fact, we've lost $80 million. So where was DFR? Imagine being in charge of the solvency of a domestic insurer, but having no control over their largest source of risk, which is the rate that they charge and collect on their biggest at-risk population of money. They do tons of self-insured business, other lines of business, large group, fully insured, but their self-insured business, there's more credit risk than insurance risk. The state, VHI are examples. The state and VHI are on the hook for the claims. Blue Cross gets paid to administer that on a PNPN basis. There might be some risk in a stop loss policy or an insurance policy, but for the most part, that's a large volume of income and business, but it doesn't present nearly the risk that just this 20% of the commercial market presents Blue Cross. So MedAdvantage and qualified health plans, what do they have in common? DFR doesn't really have much say in the rates. Medicare, the federal government dictates a lot of the ability of what can be charged or what can be collected in terms of Medicare Advantage. And while we file a solvency opinion with the Green Mountain Care Board every year, and I will say that every year we have filed that opinion, we have strongly defended the need for surplus contribution to reserve for the QHP products, but also emphasized that movements in the rate should not be made in the name of affordability unless their actuary finds, and these are terms of art in the actuarial world, that the rates are inadequate or excessive. So what we've seen is two problems. Blue Cross computed and filed inadequate rates in the last 8 years. So, and then those rates were further reduced by the Green Mountain Care. So, but I will say, so let's see, it was the last 3 years, $91 million of losses in the QHP at Blue Cross. So those were by far the worst. And this is not the responsibility of the Green Mountain Care Board. Most of those losses were because the filing itself was did not properly project claims. That was not mismanagement or bad actuarial science by Blue Cross, because or one piece of evidence that it was not that was that the Green Mountain Care Board, who independently hires an actuary to review these rates, did not find these rates problematic as the claims trend, pharmacy trend, etc. They did not find them inadequate. So back to my original comment of the inherent problem in computing rates that are that consequential to your profitability, and doing so with, if you're looking at trailing 12 months claim data, doing so with data that the oldest of it could be up to 2 years old. But we're looking at January, what are claims going to be, or even more, what are claims going to be in December of 2027? And the data set they've probably used to compute their rate finding, for 2027 includes 2025, maybe even 2024. It's just the nature of things. So what did we do? We identified this with constant communication with Blue Cross.
No.
Had that in a RBC action plan, which is probably another half hour discussion around that, which I'm happy to do any time. Before any of these losses occurred, our analyst, Jesse Lucier, had premiums and underwriting risk and pricing and underwriting as on the heat map we use using NAIC standard review techniques in the upper right corner. Increasing risk significantly, so couldn't make it in flashing. But again, the best we can do under our statutory limitations, and I'll add, we're the only state in the US that I'm aware of that is responsible for a domestic insurer that has just an advisory opinion on their rates. Every other line of business, we approve the rates, we balance affordability and adequacy, we balance market forces. So before the end of 2024, we had them in an action plan to restore their solvency. That was before their official filed RBC was even at the trigger level. Began weekly, if not monthly, if not weekly, meetings with them. Of course, this is before I rejoined the department last April. They hired a consultant to look at trying to figure out what the drivers were of this claim surge as it came to be known. We hired an external consultant to cooperate with them, but also give ourselves an independent opinion analysis of these claims and understand how the actuarial projections fit in so far. We approved a surplus note from Michigan, which was nothing short of a life raft for sure. And when I did last August, we entered a order that requires Blue Cross Blue Shield to come to DFR before signing any hospital contract, and show DFR the hospital contract for negotiated rates, and show DFR that those rates and the contract will serve not only solvency stability but for, and that order remains in place. Those things are even limited because while we can put in a position like that on Blue Cross, we cannot force a hospital counterparty to agree. But the goal there was to put as much pressure on Blue Cross and the counterparty to understand the severity of the need for better competitiveness with hospitals. So I'll pause there on just that kind of financial assumptions.
We had testimony in here last time we took this up, that the claim surge was a national event. It wasn't just Vermont that had that,
Yeah, but not to that degree.
not that.
That I'm aware. We've seen costs go up, and as reflected insurance premium, and in this last round, Green Mountain Care Board was clear that what they approved was lower than national averages, and that was true.
And when we established the Green Mountain Care Board, we told them to control rates, so.
Yeah,
And you were, I think what I heard you say is we're the only state where your DFR equivalent does not oversee rates for.
the only one I'm aware of.
Okay,
Rhode Island has a different, I think, authority altogether where like the entity so I consider my regulation over health insurers to be entity only.
Yeah.
Whereas every other line of business,
you take.
yeah.
Yeah,
national life, entity regulation, and if they're filing annuity and life insurance products, we're reviewing and approving those as well.
okay. I thought I saw sending you the numbers, okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Commissioner. I appreciate that background. I totally agree with you that there is a problem that needs to be solved or a problem that needs to be prevented from happening again. my concern about H585 is that I'm not sure the right tool is being used to solve the problem. And I'm concerned about saying we've done something that will actually help or do anything, and then it will set a bad precedent for future situations that have nothing to do with this. And so that is my main concern. I really appreciate that you laid out the problem, and now I want to make sure that we find a solution that fits the problem. And I mean, I think what you might say, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you alluded to it, is like solving the problem means giving DFR the ability to both regulate the entity and regulate the rates. But I don't think we should go there, not right now with this bill. That's a much bigger conversation, a much bigger thing.
Nor do I.
Yeah, okay, good. I'm glad to hear that. So I just, is there some other regulatory tool that you don't have that we can give you that would be helpful besides that? Because putting these two members on the board, I mean, I've read their bylaws. I know how they work.
Yeah.
I don't think it would help.
Right.
Their sole member has so much authority over what the board does that it won't matter if you have two members on the Vermont part of the board.
Right.
So I don't want this to pretend this is going to do anything.
Yeah.
So I'm in favor of giving you a tool that could be useful.
Right.
And I'm just not sure what that is. And maybe it's, some kind of advisory board that has some powers outside of the board. I don't know if that could work. Maybe it's requiring them to do bylaw revamping their bylaws and having it overseen by y'all. I don't know what it is, but I'm curious if you have an idea.
Yeah, so first off, the board, I should have started with that. The idea for board appointments is not meant as a cure or prevention of insolvency issues. It may have helped, and like further testimony here, we'll talk about what I think could have been different. But I'd say it's more on the affordability piece and general governance of the entity to be more of a Vermont serving entity then. And aligned specifically, you'll see in the language, aligned with the principles of healthcare reform. It's not to say they are not, and I agree with you that it's not going to make a huge, well, partially agree with you. I mean, you said not going to make any difference, but be aware that seven of the members, if there's no requirement, they are Vermonters. I think they are. You're correct that the sole member, Michigan, can essentially override any significant decision.
Exactly. Yeah.
What my motivation for this is, and I'll try to skip to that one thing, because it's we're short on time. And I do have some alternatives. What do I think may have been different with the dynamic of two outside members on the board? Last fall, the company proactively kicked off the board campaign. They put out some pretty potentially controversial price transparency information. You could get this service here, helping to advise their subscribers where they could influence cost of care, doctor selection. Where was that 5 to 10 years? Where was that effort and energy? Could a more subtle alignment, subtle increasing alignment with those goals and outside board influence, not control, 2 out of 12 people, could that have stimulated that conversation with board members? Like, hey, are we just agreeing to hospital prices here? Second, with some representation on the board and influence, with last year's request had. Last year, I got a letter from President Don George with a proposal for a $15 to $30 million taxpayer funded backstop. What happened when we bailed out the audit? We got stopped, the people. And I think that didn't happen. Fortunately, there was a recovery, rates stabilized. The Green Mountain Care Board gave a full contribution for reserve, which is a component of the rate that offers against things like this. But to me, that was the moment that I started to think, if would we backstop this company? And absolutely, I don't even say it's my opinion, we would have to. So what we did then is not formally agree or sign a piece of paper that says, yeah, we'll keep $30 million in reserve with Cross. But we had the discussion, like, Blue Cross is that important to the stability of a very challenged health insurance healthcare system in Vermont. 60% of the commercial market in one entity. If they left the QHP or could not perform in the QHP, MVP has no obligation to stay there, and he would probably face financial suicide for that if he had. So then who would offer plans? We have systemic problems that, to your point for questions and been brought during the HCA's testimony, I think are a symptom of years and years of a regulatory approach that and legal approach, a system that has restrained options, competition, and put it in a certain basket that we may not have the scale and size of Vermont system. Given the challenge, so what may have been different? Given the challenging dynamic and results in the QHP, would Blue Cross have taken more proactive, controversial, aggressive steps to change that dynamic? To change the dynamic where they are consistently in a market losing money, whether that be through some type of reform or more constraints on downward adjustments to rates. I compute that again, I mentioned that there were two factors in them losing money in QHP. Inadequate rates filed and computed by Blue Cross, again, not flagged by us or the Green Mountain Care Board's actuary, and then further downward adjustments. That second piece, in the name of affordability, accounts for about 50 million of the 90 million of cumulative losses. So if I was on board and seeing that happen, and I don't know that this didn't happen, I don't sit in on board meetings. We have access to their minutes, but we don't see that there was a discussion of being in this chair right here, directing management to do something about it. So I do believe there's a level of complacency that this company suffered from. And I've been on many boards, and I'll spare you my resume. I've reported to boards, been on boards, on a board. I've seen all kinds of boards. I've seen boards that are controlled by management, I've seen self-perpetuating boards, I've seen honorary boards where I choose you because I know that you can make the suggested donation, that kind of board. And all of those boards have a place and time for the evolution of an organization or the type of organization. And with that said, I think it's a subtle, to your point, it's not a game changer.
Yeah.
But imagine, go ahead.
No, I don't want to interrupt.
Just imagine board where the majority of the board is selected by the board.
Well, exactly. I mean, I think the board structure they have is not great, but I mean, for to tackle the problems that you're outlining. But I also don't think adding 2 members, I've been on lots of boards and watched lots of boards, and so much of what happens on many boards is just inertia. And, unless you have somebody like me who's going to ask really hard questions and just be like, it can be just, people just vote yes. And so I don't know that having 2 people, especially when the sole member can do anything, they can overrule the board that these 2 members would be on.
But they have not overruled anything yet.
But they don't even have to have their annual meeting in Vermont. I mean, there are things that are, make it so it's not really a Vermont board. So I just don't feel like the benefit that we might get out of having 2 members on the board is going to be worth the precedent that it sets. And so that's why I'm looking for a different regulatory
Yeah.
tool to get to what the problems that you're outlining.
Yeah, the precedent issue to me is a non-issue and it's a fair tax. Blue Cross Blue Shield is not a 501c3. They are not they pay federal taxes. They are unlike any other entity. And I think the idea that there is a precedent that other nonprofits should be concerned about, to me is far-fetched, but that's opinion, you know.
Well, I think that's easy for. I don't want to.
They
I don't
are.
want to say I think that there are reasons why that concern has come up. It's not just a pure tactic. There are legitimate reasons.
Yeah.
I've worked for one of the organizations that's very concerned. There are very legitimate reasons.
Right.
So I think that like I said, I would like to give you an effective regulatory tool that could be used in
Yeah.
instances.
So I do have, you know, I thought that because I saw the question with Mike Fisher's testimony, that there are principles of healthcare transformation. Should we just apply those to the entire board, to the organization, you know, either through the statute or whatever? I think that's the first one that comes to mind, because that is my hope, is that right now they operate solely for the benefit of subscribers. They have the majority of subscribers in the market, but they are somewhat constrained by a duty that's in statute and in their bylaws. And the idea of the two board members was to infuse a different perspective with a broader mission. And there are other ways to do that. I don't have anything drafted or whatever, but that's something that I think is a
I
potential.
think we've been through a lot of changes in healthcare and health insurance, and we used to have a lot more players in the market until we did community rating, Golden Rule, and others left because, and I think for the good of the people, especially the older people who, when you got sick, on your rates went way up, that worked. But we have a limited market. I think maybe Blue Cross tried to be everything to everyone, and there was a call for, you know, Medicare Advantage. And I think nationally we found out they haven't been really, except on a huge scale, financially viable. And the question is, where do we go here? What's one tool? Because there is this sound insurance policy, which is and should be very conservative financially. And then we've got the Green Mountain Care Board that was originally set up to run single payer healthcare, and then kind of got moved into, well, your job is to control costs. But the cost is the cost of health insurance. So in controlling costs, we got less money into the insurance company than they actually need. Sounds like it was COVID, some flurry. So I think the question is, what can we do to ensure that that doesn't happen again? Inertia is a powerful force. And I think, yes, big boards can get inertia until they get shaken up. I understand there is a change in leadership coming to the Blue Cross board. Their president is retiring.
Mhm.
I've read the resumes for the board members. They were qualified. You know, there's not the people that seem to be on there because they can make the donation to the,
No, it's not that one.
yeah,
for sure.
it's
It's
not
that one.
that board. And I also have a suspicion that I haven't gotten the agreement yet, but that if we put on two additional, you know, somebody's gonna decide who goes. which will be very disruptive to a board, or we have to put on 2 new members. We put on 2 new members, I'm pretty sure that Michigan is going to want to put on 2 new members because there's an agreement there. And I was also told they absorbed all the loss for the Advantage plans.
That, so the proposal is 1/6 or 2.
Yes.
So the nuclear arms race can't happen, or it could, but.
Well,
you could
if we have
So-
1/6, and if we add 2 on,
It's structured in such a way that we could do it as things roll off.
without having Michigan say they have a percentage of the board, like once short of the majority.
Within the 7 that are on the Vermont side, we would look to in an orderly fashion, if the board wanted to stay at 12, replace 2 expiring board members with.
And they would be appointed by the governor.
The governor, the other plan was by the same committee that appoints the Green Mountain Care Board. That was discussed and I think this occasion after
With
that.
the advice and consent of the Senate.
Sorry,
With the advice and consent of the Senate,
I don't think that's in there now, but certainly no objection to that.
well, the Green Mountain Care Board is.
Oh, well, that's that plan. We propose that as an alternative to this other nuclear arms race. So we pick 1 governor, 1 legislator. Well, what if it's 3? Then we're going to split that. And so I thought the Green Mountain Care Board principles and guidance, that appointing committee.
I'm like you, I think it's for the state to start appointing members, the board of a private business. I mean, if Global Foundries leaves Burlington, there'll probably be a major depression. There's just that many jobs. And I, quite frankly, I've said, we may like our present governor and trust him, but we might not like the 3rd governor after him. And we might not like us as well. Sessions from now.
No,
And
understood.
you could, once you start doing the political appointments, there's a risk.
Right. Yep. And I think, I don't know that, so
Okay.
understood. I just want to say that in terms of alternatives, well, and one thing to the Global Foundries comment, Blue Cross Blue Shield has been through, I think, 2 Supreme Court cases where Supreme Court deemed them quasi-public in nature. The statute means them that essentially. So I think it's kind of an unfair comparison to a for-profit, independent, potentially stock company.
May I
Oh,
ask
yeah.
a question?
Yes. I think that's up to the
And,
chair.
and that's overall, if you stand back.
Yeah.
And look at the situation with, the Green Mountain Care Board, Blue Cross, the other, long line of insurers who want to insure people here.
Yeah.
If you were designing a system where you were in charge of saying, what's the best system in terms of the recommendation
Yeah.
that you might make? Would you suggest we start over?
The first thing I would do would be to get rid of ERISA. Which confounds just about any I'll say progressive, not in the political way, but any progressive way of making sure people are taken care of and insured. And
But given that,
yeah, given that, you
where
said
we are
start
right
from
now.
scratch and scratch the
When
federal
you're,
level.
when you're deciding, based on the landscape that we have right now.
Yeah.
Should the system that we are using, the structure that we are using, the limitations on the ability of to have real competition.
Right.
Our rates compared to rates for the same thing that are seen elsewhere outside of Vermont, and also the results that we see.
Yeah.
In terms of health outcomes.
Right.
Which we see outside of Vermont compared to Vermont. Would you continue doing what we're doing?
No.
With a few different players in the back? Or would you do something revolutionary, like say, we need to really start over?
Yeah, except for starting up. Yes, I mean, I agree with your sentiment, what I perceive to be your sentiment, that we have a broken system and we need to think very radically about it. one of the things, community rating, that needs to be reexamined. But how do you do that? We are the second oldest state in the nation. I think we need age rating. We need, you know.
What about interstate compacts?
Uh,
Because we're not perhaps the only state that has an aging population,
Right.
a small population, a limitation of
Yeah.
insurance companies.
You can do that in a 1333 waiver, I believe, and we're having conversations with Connecticut that's interested. We find ourselves to be a very poor dancer and finding a dance partner who wants to partner with the
Maybe
second.
Michigan.
oldest.
Michigan.
With this.
They're already doing this.
Maine is, yeah, next
But
in the
I
oldest.
do want to say, because, you know, others are and will be watching, what do I think this board did right? The affiliation with Michigan kept this company alive. It saved this company, and it was strategic, and it showed foresight and initiative, and an understanding that being a single state independent company is not work. It is not going to work. That, you know, that's why this is not a proposal to replace the board or to take over the company. It's a proposal to infuse, to disrupt what could be a self-perpetuating, just put some new thinking into the mix. But I will say, if I were to choose strategies, even though they're not necessarily related solvency challenges, and you guys said I'll give you one thing, Kai, in 2027, because it's too late to talk. I do want to talk about how we either better balance affordability and solvency in terms of Green Mountain Care Board's actions, or return Vermont to the 49 other states that can handle and do that balancing with the insurance division.
Okay, I think it would be helpful if they send those suggestions to us, because it does, and we have at least one large player that's involved in this, which was our major hospital. And there's been a lot of actions, and I think there is, but like in school, it's, you know, cost, there's a lot of inertia and a lot of hope that if we just do nothing, they'll eventually get tired and go away and find the money. And I haven't found enough rich people to solve any of these problems. Maybe they're hiding and I can't find them, but they aren't on the tax rolls.
There also is a lot of conflict of interest.
Yeah.
That we have to recognize, and particularly in terms of dealing with our largest hospital,
Yes.
there are clear conflicts of interest. And the last thing we can do is put them in charge.
And there is a lot of work that's been going on. There's a lot of work going on in health and welfare. I think the committee system, it's easier to divide and conquer around here. And it's making sure that what's going on down there is also reflected in, I think we want to go to the right place. I think it's getting our message coordinated so that Green Mountain Care Board and DFR have the ability to march in lockstep and to know when they are dangerous territory when it comes to solvency.
They know that they're, and this is meant to be a kind statement. They are in a position where they're supposed to balance affordability in a highly transparent world and solvency. And so and this is what we do every day in the insurance division, and we're armored against it in ways, but we've set up a regulatory structure where you're telling these people, you gotta, we're gonna have a public hearing and everyone's gonna be looking at you and we're gonna consider affordability, do the right thing, and I don't know that they would characterize it that way, I think.
No, I've always thought it that way.
But it's not a position I would,
Yeah.
that in that process, they have more accountability for affordability and than they do the solvency. I have the solvency accountability.
So we need to restore that balance, and I mean, the closest thing I can think of is long-term care insurance.
Yeah.
That, I don't know, they're doubling my price. Well, they, you know, in order to remain solvent, as the costs went up, the cost had to go up, and yeah, people found more priced out of the market. I think we're finding that in healthcare right now, and so,
And this proposal will not solve that. It's not designed to solve that. It's, so it, but no,
but
Yeah, I just, I'm not sure what it's designed to solve. This is also really dependent on who you get in those positions.
Right.
And I mean, I know you would wanna. It just, so if you have other ideas to get to that, I'd like to hear them. I do like the part about the executive compensation though. To keep that in. But
I don't.
I do.
that's just
but
getting.
Started with Davis White and ended up with a used stove salesman.
But
Organization was belly up in 2 years.
But I think that having just two members on board, even in, you know, in the best case scenario where they're saying what you want them to be saying or what you think they need to be saying,
Yeah.
No, we
There-
did.
it's not gonna get the results we need.
Okay, we are now
Yeah.
a full 20 minutes.
Well, one more thing, if I may, there was also discussion of association health plans in that testimony. I really think if you're going to do something different on that, you should really have a broker in here. And you could bring a blast from the past, Christine Oliver, who's the commissioner at the HCA, who has a policy background.
And she was working, last time we looked at associations, she was working at setting them.
Yeah, she worked for a
Yeah.
large brokerage,
Yeah.
but has that, understands all the goals in healthcare policy, but also understands the
Okay,
business
that-
challenges and association health plans, ERISA, all those things. You know, how to make the small group more competitive, et cetera, already
Okay.
making it more competitive.
Definitely
would be
have
very
her
useful.
in. Because. I don't know what the feds are like, and to do, we spent weeks working on association health plans. From one, and then they just pulled the rug.
Right.
Said no. Which spared us having to make some very painful decisions, so. But this time they may not, then, okay, so that's just what we need, is somebody to come in.
Thank you for the
Thank
extra
you
time
very much.
and the engagement.
Okay. And we have Alex McCracken has been patiently waiting on Zoom. Okay, welcome, Alex, and, okay, we are still looking to health insurance reports, H585.
Hi, good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Alex McCracken. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Director of Communications and Legislative Affairs for the Department of Vermont Health Access, or DVA. Hopefully I can give you some time back today because I should be fairly brief. DVA appreciates the opportunity to testify on H585, and we would like to request two minor clarifying edits to the current language in Section 9 of the bill. While DVA largely defers to our colleagues at the Department of Financial Regulation in representing the interests of the administration regarding H585, the department would like to draw the committee's attention to two items that require correction or clarification. Section 9 requires DVA to submit a report to the legislature regarding health insurance plan design flexibility, specifically regarding out-of-pocket limits on prescription drugs. The department is able and willing to conduct this analysis. However, we would request that the committee consider the following two language changes. Firstly, the large group market is outside of our scope. DVA does not collect the data required to assess the large group market, and as such cannot produce this portion of any reporting requirement. DVA would recommend amending the language in Section 9 to exclude the large group market. Understanding that there may be compelling reasons the committee wishes to include the large group market, an alternative to this suggestion would be to shift the language to properly designate DFR as the entity responsible for any analysis of the large group market. Secondly, DVA notes that the statutory reference in the current text of Section 9 is not specific to the prescription drug out-of-pocket limit. There are several other provisions within 8 VSA 4092, which do not pertain to the legislative intent of this bill, as we understand it. DEVA would request that the bill be updated to be specific to the subsections B through C of 8 VSA 4092. I have submitted written testimony to the committee, which highlights these proposed changes in the current bill language, and I'm happy to answer any questions that I can at this time. Thank you.
Okay. Alex, what I've got, and I was making notes that you can't give us a report on the large group market because you don't get any information on them. The prescription, out-of-pocket limits of prescription drugs is, what would you like changed there?
So we're happy to do the reporting. As we understand the legislative intent, this reporting requirement is specific to plan design flexibility around prescription out-of-pocket limits.
Yeah.
But there are other elements in the referenced statutory language at 8 VSA 4092 that are not specific to that item, to the prescription out-of-pocket limit. So we would just ask that the language be specific to subsections B and C, B through C of that statutory reference.
Okay. Any questions, committee?
Just an observation, perhaps.
No, I was just gonna say it's good, sounds good.
Okay, straightforward.
And this goes outside of the scope of what is being discussed here, but my biggest problem with the expenses associated with prescription drugs, the lack of transparency. I'd love to go to a drugstore, a pharmacy, and say, I have this prescription from my doctor. What's the best price you can give me for that prescription? Not just the price that my insurance has, because there are an innumerable number of companies that are selling things at a discount. What I found, and I had a problem with my insurance company, long story, so I had a month until it got fixed that I had to buy my prescriptions out of pocket at those costs that are, and you know what? I found I could buy my prescriptions at half the price that I was getting from my insurance. But you can't get that by going to a pharmacy and asking for it directly without getting a frown or a scowl, because it's a lot of work for them to come up with those numbers. Why can't, if all the things we regulate, why can't we regulate price transparency? That would save a huge amount of money for providers, but we don't do it.
In health and welfare, there are, get into PBMs, and I would like to have this committee start looking at them again. But we found out in health and welfare number, there were, they couldn't tell you. And on
They
some
won't tell you.
occasions,
They
well,
could tell you.
there were agreements, signed agreements with the PBM that forbid them from.
Well, that perhaps is one of the things that we should consider legislatively dealing with.
We removed that
Yeah.
because in many cases, especially with antibiotics, you could get a generic much cheaper and full price.
The whole variety of things that are available right now at the press of a button through artificial intelligence and other database searches, and many of the things that are costing us a lot of money in healthcare is the protectionism associated with agreements between providers not to disclose information.
Right, I've got an Ray RX, was just waved at. Have we passed that bill out? All right. There's a group of states out west who have gotten together and they offer a series of medical products. One of them is a Ray RX. It's like Martin Short, you go there and you look it up.
Yeah.
It's in here. Okay, we'll get it out. I looked it up. My husband takes one drug, he gets it through Canada Pharmacy. It's new drug, so he's had a massive price increase from $48 to $90 for 3 months. So I said, I'll look at our RX. Locally, my local pharmacies, 2 of them were $3.89 and one was $1.81. That's the difference locally. And that was still double the price. That one was being shipped from Great Britain and it included a tariff of $5. So, yeah, Alex is gone.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Have a wonderful day.
So we are going to keep going. I think our next witnesses are in the hallway. Kirby, Rebecca, we are back to. We're going back to education transformation. Wanted the blue clear.
Get your husband's the contract.
It does, yeah. Tell us about it.
You know, all of these people come from California.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
I missed that. I never seen it
I
anymore.
know.
So we do this.
Okay, so we've got the next group. Okay. Why the lead is here very far? Why is,
Paying attention to this?
okay. Vermont's education system.
Well, it's regional assessment districts.
Okay, okay. This is our first walk through that, and we're looking for Kirby. Who's probably still drafting amendments for the company's acts.
Do you want one, Randy? Want a cookie?
No, thank you.
Maybe
Thanks for that.
Chris. One left, Tom. But give me the plastic container left because I had to pay a deposit on that. It was worn out things.
Okay. So anyway, today, all right, we're gonna do property classification for regional assessment. Oh, waiting for Kirby in May.
Breaking?
No, all right. This is a long, fact, you know, we're waiting for Kirby. Who I hope.
Everybody wants Kirby today.
I know. The only one I haven't, I've been trying to get a hold of Rick Siegel to just talk about laws around the responsibilities of board members.
Oh,
I think we're setting up some ways if we go this way. But I could, Eddie was, if Eddie's not going that way, then I could. Listen to time. He gets going. Where's the hills? Where's the building?
It is. Rebecca. I was told.
Okay, Jake,
I think she might be coming in person.
I've been through the list.
Yes.
We did get. We were just about to go on to the tax department.
Oh, sorry, yeah,
No,
I had it
yeah.
running in my office.
We are way behind schedule. Little amendments to miscellaneous tax. Okay, so we have been through health insurance. We've been through the pilot fund and fish and wildlife fees, and now we're going to education.
Or we did solar briefly.
That's right. Decided to cop out on solar. All right.
We took a pass on that.
We just need to release it, and I will need to get.
I messaged Melissa.
Did you? Okay, thank you. We will get a release statement. And. There's 9, section by section, okay. But today we are looking at
I thought I would share the H 955 and the
Okay.
actual bill language with you, which is under Beth's name because she
Ah, that's.
was the
okay.
first drafter on this.
Yeah.
The education section.
But you've already done a walkthrough though, right?
We did the joint hearing,
Joint walkthrough, but we haven't
so,
had a chance for questions and.
yeah, so I thought today you would want the deeper dive, believe it or not, the joint hearing was actually the skimming of this.
Okay. Seesaws.
We're not talking about CISOs, thankfully, we're jumping to section 30,
Rads.
RADs, much cooler names.
Rats.
Rads.
Oh, rats.
Rad.
Seesaws and rats. All right.
Seesaws. That's so funny. That's how you say it.
Okay. Enough. I mean, it's only 2:30, guys. We're gonna be here till 5:30. Let's keep going.
Okay, so we're looking at H 955 as passed by the House. Section 30, starting on page 67. And we've got 65 pages to go. Luckily, we've got a big chunk of conforming changes. So it starts with a new subchapter being created in one of the property evaluation chapters. That's going to be called regional assessment districts. I'll try to flag as many as I can remember changes that were made from Act 73. So if you recall, this was part of Act 73. There was a tax department report that came out before the session that lent a lot of insight into fleshing out the RAD concept. So Ways and Means did a lot of work on these sections. And so what you have here is replacement sections for those Act 73 parts. One of the changes was in Act 73. This was called statewide and regional assessment districts. And that was changed to regional out of concerns that of a perception that this new system would be like the state, like the Department of Taxes controlling property valuation, which compared with Act 73 didn't really do that, but this has moved even farther away from that, as you'll see. So the subchapter will be regional assessment districts. The legislative intent is the same as Act 73, which is to create regional assessment districts to make sure properties are regularly reappraised, to make sure that property data collection is consistent and standardized, and that property valuation is conducted by trained and certified individuals. Proposed section 3416 would be the establishment of the RADs. Under this language, there will be some number of RADs. We don't know yet because the boundaries have not been established at this point. It's not established here.
Goal was to make sure those as closely as possible were the same as
Overlap with
school
districts.
districts or whatever
And
we see.
enough size for having enough parcels.
Yeah.
Which we'll get to, but the idea is that once there's the RADs are established, they'll be broken up into 6 groups, with each of those groups responsible for a master appraisal agreement. In subsection B here. Well, actually, I want to flag one thing in any first. These are some of the changes, and so I'm going to try to make sure that you're aware of some of the big points here. First, under this language, member municipalities may contract jointly with one or more third parties. So there's may language here, and you'll see that where there's may language in a few places. So they may do their own master appraisals, or they may contract jointly with one or more third parties under A. And then under B, I want to bring your attention to the first time there'll be a mass reappraisal under the RAD system, it will be voluntary.
This came from feedback from the Department of Taxes with concerns about whether all the towns will be able to coordinate with the department and coordinate together to really get this functioning fully as intended at the first go. So RADs will not be effective until 2031, and then the first 6 years after 2031, it will actually be voluntary. So this is a very long-term transition. And then after that first set of simultaneous full reappraisals, a municipality shall conduct a reappraisal jointly with one or more other member municipalities. So even in the long run, the language here envisions that the municipalities within the RAD will band together, but they don't all have to band together under the same RAD, under hiring the same firm. There's still freedom there for 2 of the municipalities could work together to do their mass reappraisal, and that's enough to satisfy what's required under the RAD. Section 3417 is the guidelines, procedures, and the PDR thinks it's necessary that there's some rulemaking authority. This is mostly out of Act 73 guidelines for contracting with third parties. This goes to trying to make everything consistent across the state. Will be guidance for standards for the collection and recordation of parcel data, requirements relating to information technology, recordation.
Recordation? You mean recording? Recordation.
That's the word.
Recording should say recording.
It's a legal
Is
word.
recordation different than recording?
No.
You're dumb, right? I never heard.
Formal act of
I mean, it would have been for the collection and the recording of parcel data. Standardized practices for full reappraisal, including cases in which physical inspections are unnecessary and how technology is utilized. This is the same vision as Act 73 had. And then subsection B is where PBR will be establishing the schedule for every 6 years. There's some leeway for when oddball things come up and there needs to be an adjustment. PBR is not locked into the letter of the law. And there's also some language here that's similar to current law that funds can be withheld if a municipality is not on the 6-year schedule. If they don't conduct a master appraisal here, they're listed.
And those funds would, any funds or funds from the education fund or funds from the parcel, per parcel fee or what?
It would be under this language, it's ended. I think the current law is actually more specific, but there's a number of state funds that the department holds and distributes to municipalities. So presumably at least these funds that come from the Department of Taxes.
What?
And it could include education funds.
It's big.
It is. There was discussion in Ways and Means, and the landing spot wasn't a good thing.
Okay.
So and then also in sub C here, you'll recall earlier where for the first year, it's fallen, or for the first 6 years, it's voluntary, and then after the first simultaneous full reappraisal, it starts to become mandatory, and so there's a provision that PBR will make that call. Next, we have the Regional Assessment District Appeals Boards. In general, these would replace the role that the Board of Civil Authority has in hearing municipal valuation appeals. There would still be the grievance process, which is the first informal step that's done. That is when a property owner can go and talk to the lister informally and try to work it out. That's the grievance process. After that, though, there would be the option here to appeal to this newly created RAD appeals board.
And this is only for valuations within. For these math reappraisal appeals, or maybe like an individual one-off. Reappraisal after a sale or something, correct? Or,
The language here is that a board shall hear appeals of valuation within its regional assessment districts. So
oh, that could be anything, then,
any,
not just the math appraisals.
the expectation is,
Sorry, two people are.
No, I'm just, why is there a reappraisal after?
I was trying to come up with an example of it.
Oh, okay.
And maybe a bad example, sorry.
Look,
That's my thing.
no, you're right, there are appeals in the in-between years.
That's what I thought.
So most of them are expected to happen after a master appraisal when there's a big change. But there is granulous maintenance that will be done like now, every year in between master appraisals, and that could result in someone appealing. It also could be that someone, a new owner, looks at their property tax bill for the first time, so that.
That's why after a sale, see, I don't know why.
I thought you meant like,
No, I did it. We got our house bought for a lot less than the appraised.
Yeah.
It could be, it could also, it could be,
Win, but
it could be a person who's owned it for a while and never looked close. There's a lot of reasons why it could happen, but there is. The way it's written is that it would be all valuation appeals.
So BCAs would just not exist anymore?
They would exist because they do other things.
Okay. Right. Okay. They would do this.
they wouldn't do the appeals.
Yeah. So, we went over this, I think, in the joint committee meeting, but so
Was there a worry, sorry, was there a worry in committee about like timing of that? So like I think about my time on the Milton BCA, people come in and do your thing and then you go out and see it and then it's resolved pretty quickly. But what happens if, you do it 10 towns at once that are being reappraised and have 3% from each town, which adds up pretty quick.
this has, the RAD appeals board is X number of people. They break up into 3-person panels for each appeal.
Yeah.
And they're kind of all happening simultaneously. So it's similar but different with the BCA approach.
I mean, the hope is there'll be fewer appeals, but there won't be such a long period of time between the assessments, right? Isn't that part of the goal?
In the very long run, that is
Very long.
a goal. In the short, it might be, the first batch of students might be involves me size at a time.
You have
Sure.
reappraised in 15 years.
Yeah,
Right, trust me, I know.
There will be.
Yeah.
Sticker shock. But in theory, if you reappraise and you don't spend more, your tax rate should come down. If your value is higher. In theory, but there are always winners and losers.
so you'll see, there are rules here for how many representatives from each municipality within the RAD. And the provisions of an executive board.
These are all volunteers.
Yes. They'll be appointed, the municipality will have the option of paying them. There's nothing provided by the state for that. And as far as,
With the 80% that we give them. Pilot fund.
You have to get paid.
We'll give it to you, but this is where you have to. spend.
Exactly.
That works.
there is some additional funding on this as well that we'll get to. So those are the appeals boards, 3-person panels. And then there's the language going through the actual appeals process. This mostly follows what's done for the BCA's now. So 30-day period to appeal. One thing to flag is that a property owner will have a choice to appeal to the RAD appeal board or skip it and go straight to PBR report. That is a feature here. Otherwise, it follows the current process, except having different body decide that first level for the RAD appeals boards.
What's the benefit of starting with the rat?
Cheaper is a big one. You could actually do it yourself conceivably. And if your issue is not one that's highly technical, then that could be appealing.
No pun intended.
No pun intended at all. Yeah, so I think that's,
You could go directly to court.
yeah,
Okay. I had one constituent who went in to do his appeal, said, I appeal every year, I go to court and I live.
A lot of landlords do that. Yeah.
So I don't need to talk to them.
interesting. As far as who has the most background and who's better able.
Yeah.
I think an argument could be made that someone does property evaluation all the time as opposed to a judge.
Yeah.
I'd be actually better.
Judge, yeah. Okay.
Um,
What does he know about housing price? They don't like.
I think a court would probably rely on expert testimony a lot.
Yeah.
Those would become technical.
Okay.
There's a rule that no more than 2 board members from a single municipality can be on the 3-person panel. There was some discussion and ways and means about how that should work out. There's also a provision here stating that this is not intended to affect the grievances we talked about. And there's also a provision to make clear that any evaluation that's done by PBR, of course, and there's a growing number of evaluations that have been done by PBR as that's expanded over time recently, would go directly to either Department of Taxes or Superior Court. There's also some of this language, just as a side note, starts to a lot of the statute we have around PBR right now is dated where PBR was once its own department. And there's a lot of kind of language about the director of PBR, or like as if they were a commissioner or something. So there's language here that's kind of bringing that focus back more on the Department of Taxes, by the way. So you'll see references to the commissioner instead of the director for a lot of this appeal stuff. There was also the vision as part of this that when this transition happens and the department starts to presumably hear more valuation appeals, that they will actually have a full-time hearing officer for this. They currently have a full-time hearing officer for all other tax appeals, but valuation appeals go to PBR and PBR uses part-time hearing officers. And there's been increases to pay for those people and things like that over time. And so the vision here is to switch over to having that one full-time hearing officer for this. At one point, there was an appropriation in the future for that position that's been removed, but that's still the vision here.
Still needed.
Is that instead of going to a part-time PBR hearing officer, it will be a full-time Department of Taxes hearing officer.
But that's not necessary until the future state.
Yeah, it's gonna be after 2030, the first time these appeals happen. Otherwise, this language is like current law and the way these valuations go, and currently as well in your PBR report. There's a choice to appeal to either tax or skip that step and go straight to court. And here's where we see recognition of the election to bypass. The taxpayer decided to bypass the RAD appeals board.
Wait, so it's appealing to either the commissioner or the Superior Court, so you can choose.
Yeah, under this language is basically you'd go to the list of grievance, you're not happy, you then have your choice of 3.
Yeah. You can, what is it called, jurisdiction shopping or something like that?
Venue shopping.
Venue shopping, right.
There, yeah. If you could also do all three, if you go RAD appeals board and then appeal from there, commissioner, and then appeal from there board.
But if you go directly to the court, you can't. That's it.
It's just in court. Sure. I think. That's the term. So all the language here on page 74 is the current appeals process being put into a new place. Section B on page 75 is part of that process also for further appeals.
I'm just rolling through. Is this just mostly?
Yeah, I'm skimming it to see if there's, yes, this is the current law process. I'm kind of skimming it to see if there's anything that was changed, but I'm not seeing any. Like the current process is that when the commissioner or court hears these valuation appeals, say it goes to the RAD appeals board first. Those appeals are heard de novo, which means that they start fresh with the facts. So if you try to go to the RAD appeals board informally and argue your case yourself, you're not stuck with some bad facts. Like for instance, you lose because you hired an engineer or something and weren't able to prove it. If you're still unhappy, you can go to the commissioner of taxes this time, pay an engineer, and you're not stuck with the facts from before.
In the middle of
You're fresh.
page 74, there's a fee for an entry fee for an appeal to the commissioner.
Current law.
That's current law. Is there a fee to appeal to the RAD board?
No.
And then there are court fees, but those are separate.
The de novo piece, is that new or is it ever a precedent that you could give people the choice to either go on the record versus de novo? Because I mean, de novo means hiring an engineer again or a lawyer, but is there an option in like some cases where they want all just to appeal on the record?
I mean, there's not an option for this. It's de novo. I mean, if you had paid an engineer to do some study, you could still bring that to the commissioner office.
That's usually, that's the construct for a lot of appeals, is they're done.
Yeah, I mean, especially administrative context like this, where the concern would be that maybe a person did not hire an attorney or hire experts at first, and would seem unfair for them to be stuck in because they didn't, they weren't savvy first go around. So again, this is the current appeal process, which there's a lot, but there's an entire appeals chapter that's being placed here.
And is that chapter being?
It's being reviewed. Yeah.
Setting up the new system.
So 31, section 31 on page 79 is removing some of the current process for the director ordering reappraisals, because the RAD system is meant to replace what we have now for PDR to order reappraisals in certain instances. And then section 32, it's a change in equalization study. The provision stating that all municipalities within a RAD shall be treated as a single entity for purposes of the equalization process under the section, provided at least one simultaneous full reappraisal has been completed by the member municipalities as determined So they're all getting master appraisal at the same time. So they'll all be treated as one when the COA is determined on the equalization study. And that would have a waterfall type effect for the in-between years also, because they're all starting as being having to treat as one.
But so they'll continue to be treated as one as we go
Yeah,
on the out years.
yeah. So you think about how a COA,
Well, it gives you a larger base. I assume that might balance it less.
they'll be treated as one market essentially.
Yeah.
So it is potentially a significant change. So you're aware.
Would depend on how it. If you compared Stowe and Morrisville, I don't think they're the same housing market. Stowe and Waterbury, closer.
I think the idea is, even within Stowe, there's different parts, and currently they're mixing together as the same market. That if you go geographically large enough, that it would work itself out.
Yeah.
Possibly.
Okay.
Yeah. Section 33 is just moving the statute on PBR's valuation of public utilities from, for some reason, in current law, it was placed in the appeals chapter. That's being repealed, and it's just being moved to more appropriate next to some of the other statutes where the PBR is doing the evaluations. Section 34 is the subsection A is the repeal of the Act 73 provisions, which are effective on passage, and subsection B is the appeals chapter we've been talking about repeal. That's not repealed until the rest go online. Section 35 goes to the state's compensation for reappraisals and valuation costs for municipalities. As I said before, when we had the joint hearing, the $850 per parcel fee that exists now to help pay for reappraisals and grand list maintenance is staying, but it's only going to be considered to be for maintenance in between the reappraisal years, the master reappraisal years, and there's a new funding mechanism for the master reappraisals, which would be that on those master reappraisal years, the department will be to pay for 2/3 of the estimated cost, or $66 per grand list parcel. This is partly based on the tax department's report that the cost of doing master appraisal should be about $100 per parcel.
I missed that, sorry.
The language here, the basic compensation on $66 per parcel for 2/3 of the estimated cost is partially based on the department estimating that it should cost about $100 to do a master appraisal. Yeah. It's also be seen as $11 per year. Years. 36, section 36 is the hearing officer position I mentioned that was removed. Section 37 is the start of conforming changes for the repeal of the appeals chapter, and it's moved to the subchapter of RADs and the RAD appeals boards. We have a lot of this.
Representative Kornheiser did say there was a lot of healing going on.
And for these conforming changes, I would like to give credit to the Department of Taxes for being extremely helpful, the Village Council, and tracking down all the appropriate places to make these adjustments.
And willing to bet we'll find a few more before we're finished.
I mean, probably,
Believe
that is what happened. If not, then we did a really great job. That's mostly them. So that brings us to section 53, which is the regional assessment district transition. There was some similar language in Act 73 for this, but so what this version says is that PVR will not order any new municipal reappraisals of grand list properties that are not part of a regionalized appraisal system after January 1, 2028. Reappraisal orders for which a municipality does not have a contract in place before January 1, 2031 will no longer have the force and effect of law. This situation is also why there's some wiggle room for the first years, because there could be instances where a municipality is allowed to skip the first simultaneous mass reappraisal because they just had one. So situations like that is why there's wiggle room in the language at the beginning of this. And then a municipality shall not enter into a new reappraisal contract on or after January 1, 2028, except for those that are part of the bracket system. Then subsection B, on or before every January 15 between 2028 and 2031, the commissioner will support a report to this committee and with some means on the progress made in preparing for the implementation of regional assessment districts. So there's quite a lot of setup work switching over to this large new system. And then section 54 is on the boundaries that we talked about before. There's a lot of talk and ways and means and what they landed on after feedback from the department was to have the department report back later. That report back is December 15, 2029. It's when, and so that's part of that is to give a lot of room for the General Assembly to work out school districts. So the thought is by December 5th, well, by 2029, those should be known. And then so the department would do that work in 2029 to figure out their boundaries with that information. But they're required to do it so that the districts are aligned with school district boundaries and have a minimum of 10,000 parcels. And then there's some discretion when identifying regional assessment district boundaries. Well, they may identify boundaries that include more than one school district or identify more than one regional assessment district boundary within one school district. That's just to cover any strange scenarios that might come up. So with that, presumably in the legislative session in 2030, you'll take that information and you'll set the RAD boundaries. So then in 2031, the work commences. Section 55 is unrelated to the grand scheme of all of this. It was just a miscellaneous piece included by Ways and Means that allows in kind of niche instance where a board of abatement decides to abate tax for someone based specifically on clear or obvious error or mistake of the listers, that the state will reimburse for that abatement for the education tax. And the instances where that would come up would be something like there's one building on a property and the lister made the mistake of thinking there were two buildings, but that building no longer exists, and they based their valuation off the two buildings.
When I
They-
saw
they go in
the
and they
garage
go-
burnt down and they've been paying taxes on the garage for 5 years.
Something like that where the assessing official doesn't realize, that that's no longer the facts. And so they base their valuation off of incorrect reality, something like that. Okay, so section 56 is another one-off piece, that came from the House. This was, I think, one of the housing bills, had this language and it was moved over to this bill because it seemed more appropriate for a property valuation. So it adds, a provision to the statute on the powers of property valuation review. A duty to issue guidance to ensure consistent and accurate appraisal of fair market value of properties and manufactured home parks in a limited equity cooperative. And then taking into considerations of limitations under section of law on equity cooperatives. So there's a few mobile home parks in the state that are set up under a limited equity cooperative, which has restrictions on ownership. So they want PVR to take that into account and to put out some guidance because, as I understand it, the valuation of the properties varies. So we want some consistency for these valuations. We're done, friends. Going through what day? Never catch Charlotte.
Wow.
They look like he wanted some kind of response.
Everyone was like so low energy.
Thank you for this.
That's good. That's.
We're clapping every time. I know, perfect. Now that was like a kitty clap.
Okay.
So section 57 is the start of tax classifications. So we're gonna switch gears over to tax classifications, which is what a lot of people think of as the second home's tax rate.
Yeah.
So this system, give you the broader view before we dive in, this is set to go online July 1, 2030. So still with a longer, on the longer end of implementation than some of the
So
other
that would
education
be the
changes.
2031 tax year, which is also when the foundation formula is supposed to go in. Am I remembering all of that correctly?
Let's say it again, I'm sorry.
This goes in the 2030, that's the
Mhm.
2031 tax year, right? Which is also the year that the foundation formula is going into effect.
The
Okay,
fiscal year, yes,
and this is the second homes tax.
yes.
So all the people that are panicking about their B and Bs, right, or Airbnbs right now
Mhm.
are not gonna get an enhanced tax bill this year or next year or
Yes,
the year after.
yes.
Okay, and that,
This would be a change in how taxes are paid, property taxes are paid at the same time that there's the new education system going online.
okay,
And my understanding is that that was in part because the task department said they needed this time to ramp up to. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's two things here. There's the
that's it.
decision to align the transition to a new education system with changes to the tax base for that system. So those things are aligned. That's part of it. And the other, there's also a practical part of this where tax has said, yes, they need time to set this up. There's a lot of, and we'll get into a lot of the data collection that will go into this.
And the local grand list, every grand list must be updated.
Grand lists have to be updated specifically, and that's a segue into what's actually the language right in front of you here, which is on the grand list. The assessing officials will have to start reporting the number of dwellings per parcel. And that's used in conjunction with the new data, the property or the Department of Taxes will start collecting to put the system in place. So yes, there's some work from assessing officials that they need to gear up for and be prepared to do. And then there's work from the department, especially in the transition year, where we go from not knowing this information to knowing, hopefully, that the number of dwellings and how each of those dwellings are used.
And not all listing departments are created equal. Some towns, I believe, still elect a board of listers who may or may not. There's training available.
And I mean, and obviously this is
Get
in
better.
addition to what the assessing officials are already having to do for groundless maintenance, for they are responsible for already. And part of why this is set up this way, I mean, being completely honest, there's not, with the current systems we have in the state, there's not a whole lot of ways without major reform. For example, Hawaii is a state that has different tax classifications based on how properties are used. But that's tied directly to how they do zoning on a county. There's 5 counties in Hawaii, and each county has its zoning that's lined up with its tax system. You don't have anything like that, right? So we can't, unless we're talking about setting up statewide zoning, we're left with options like this. There's Montana that has a classification system for taxes, but they are already doing state assessments.
Yeah.
So we don't have that. So what we do have is, so to avoid having assessing officials take on a gigantic new load, they're given this responsibility, and then the Department of Taxes is doing the heaviest lifting in collecting all the information on how properties are being used. And as we talked about in the joint hearing, this is drafted in a way in which not every non-homestead property would be required to file a dwelling use attestation. It would be those that are claiming a use other than the second home rate, the non-homestead, non-homestead residential rate. If you know your parcel is being used for non-homestead residential, then you can file nothing, and that's fine. And then the department has to do the work.
Instead, and you're listed as residential, we know you're a non-homestead.
And if you're already filing a homestead and your entire parcel is used as a homestead, then even if your entire parcel is not used as a homestead, even if you have a business purpose, you can still cover that with the homestead declaration. So that was the tension and the line trying to be walked with putting this large new system in place, is trying to leverage as much as what we already have in Vermont and not create more work. So that's what's led us here. That's what went into the Department of Taxes report from last year on this, and much of the system is based off of their report. So first, you have the establishment of the tax classification system, where every parcel will be classified as one or more of the 3 classifications.
One or more.
Yeah, because for mixed use properties, some of the trickiest part of this is that some properties are used for,
I got a store, I rent the apartment, and I live on the 3rd floor. I have an accessory dwelling unit that I rent out occasionally or full time. So.
And just one of the, practical things here is people use their property in all sorts of different ways. And so having a system in place that isn't completely confusing or bewildering to people is part of how this is attempting to be tailored.
So
So you-
non-homestead, non-residential is business.
Yes,
Okay.
and apartments.
And apartments. All right.
And non-homestead residential would be typically second homes, short-term rentals, or like just a completely vacant property that's not being used for anything. That have a dwelling.
Okay, so wait,
No,
no,
it has to have a dwelling.
Okay, so it has a dwelling unit, I've got a shed on it, I keep my tractor in,
Not a dwelling unit.
not a dwelling unit. So I just have a house on it that's not,
Yeah, well, we're almost at the definition. Well, we are in the definition, so let's just go through it. So to be a dwelling unit, it has to be a building or part of the building, including a single family home, a unit with a multifamily building, an apartment, a condominium, or other similar property or structure containing a separate means of ingress and egress. So it has to have its own individual exit. So that's going to eliminate most hotel situations.
okay, and also the people that rent out the back bedroom. If it doesn't have a separate entrance, you're on Airbnb and you rent a room.
So yes, and again, this definition is based off of the tax department report. Just so you know the background there, it wasn't that Ways and Means had a particular policy goal with that. It was, so this does come with the department and they, they'll be able to speak to why they wanted this approach. A short-term rental that's contained completely within the house would not be a dwelling unit by itself. It would be an additional dwelling unit. So that is something to be aware of. So it's all of those things. And also is designed or intended to be used for occupancy by one or more persons in a household, including providing living facilities for sleeping, cooking, and sanitary needs. So a building that does not have a kitchen and bathroom and a place for sleeping is not a dwelling unit. And therefore would not ever have the second home rate applied to it. And it's fit for habitation as or fit for year-round habitation as determined by the commissioner. So your camps would not be taxed as second homes. Unless they're nice ones that are fit for year-round habitation. And then the other, since we're talking about that, the other thing that goes into this is long-term rental. Because for the most part, if it has a dwelling unit and it's not it's not a homestead, it would fall into the second home rate, except not long-term rentals. So the definition for long-term rental, which would move a dwelling unit that's not a homestead into the lower non-homestead, non-residential rate. To qualify, the dwelling unit would have to be one for which rent is paid for the right of occupancy for periods of at least 30 days. There was a mention about that and landlord-tenant law. And it is true that under landlord-tenant law, you could have a lease that is less than 30 days. But under this, if you want to avoid the short-term rental treatment, it would have to be rights of occupancy for periods of at least 30 days. And that could affect how some landlords do things. Second, if the dwelling unit dwelling unit has combined rental periods in the current calendar year that total at least 6 calendar months. So it's 30 days at a chunk for at least 6 months total. And there's a bona fide landlord-tenant relationship between the parties, which is language that just allows the Department of Taxes to do compliance work to see through phony leases that are meant to get around.
We did this miscellaneous tax for the property transfer tax. Section 2 and 3.
There was a correct, similar language added for the transfer tax when it comes to the new higher rate for transfers of second homes was the target there. But because that language had linked it to the landlord certificate only, there's instances where people could arrange to get a landlord certificate and they not actually
my
be able.
company bought the house and they rented to me for 6 months of the year.
So that's what this language is intended to avoid a similar situations. What happened with that?
So they take a lot of testimony on these definitions. I just, I remember hearing someone on Hinsdale expressing some concerns with this, and from a housing perspective, did this go through the housing committee in the House?
No,
No, this language came from the Department of Taxes, all of this. These definitions, for the most part, there was tweaking of the definitions, but for this definition of long-term rental, this is straight out of the tax department's report. It's what they wanted. To be really clear, though, bona fide landlord-tenant relationship, when it comes to a dispute between landlords and tenants that end up in court, will be interpreted and decided by a judge under the case law that exists and all of that. That actually doesn't have anything directly to do with this. This would be, the department could rely on the legal concept of what that means, making its interpretation. But that will come down to the department making an interpretation. And I suppose it challenged the court might have to interpret this too, but that doesn't put this squarely in landlord-tenant law either. The concepts could be borrowed, there could be interpretations based on them, as, you know, similar things, but,
This comes from a comprehensive review by the tax department with recommended language.
There's a report or two, maybe even three.
They actually did read that.
Okay.
yes.
and again, the goal is, I mean, there's,
Mr. Chair.
the goal is to avoid, you know, gaming. And there's other things, there's other provisions that we have here.
They'll find
Do
a
that.
way and we'll have to write a law that says you can't do it.
And yeah, I mean, this one I would say it offers a lot of flexibility to the department. Because if you tried to come up with an alternative, you would probably try to think of, well, this scenario and that scenario, we can try to account for it. But there's scenarios we've missed maybe. So this is broad to give them the discretion as the entity that's trying to enforce compliance, just to look through any situation and that's, I think that's. So that's what long-term rental means. We are going to get next into a place where the means can work, and that is to say, what does long-term rental not mean? So a dwelling unit that's used by an employer to house the employer's employees for at least 6 calendar months, which need not be consecutive in the current calendar year. So this is to get obviously at employer provided housing where maybe it's not a long-term rental because it's part of your employment, not, you know, you don't have a lease for rent.
Watch local employer and there is a house that the license plates in the driveway. Turn over with some regularity. It's transitional housing until you find a house.
I need to correct what I said. I said what it doesn't mean, but we're still talking about what it does mean. So
Yeah.
sorry about that. So sorry if that was confusing. So yes, it means this too on permanent. So as used in this section, employee means an individual who is reported by an employer for purposes of complying with unemployment compensation. So this is, if you have a duty to report this person's an employee under the, you know, UI laws, then that's what we'll use. And the department should have access to that by connecting with Department of Labor. But farm employees do not have to follow the UI law, so there's a further definition there for those. So it says, or a farm employee as defined under law without regard for whether the farm employee has a requirement to report. So
I'm touching farm housing.
right. So employee housing, farm employee housing,
Star would be found.
those are not considered second homes or short-term housing. So your definition of non-homestead, non-residential is a parcel or portion of a parcel that does not qualify as homestead or non-homestead residential. In other words, this is your overflow bucket if there's a question about where something should be classified. Non-homestead residential is a parcel or portion of a parcel with a dwelling unit. So again, if there's no dwelling unit, then there's no risk of being classified as a short-term rental or a second home. That could come up when if you just have a business, you know, it's a restaurant. You would not have to, we'll get into the dwelling use attestation, but because of the way that different parts work with each other, you wouldn't need to file a homestead declaration, obviously, 'cause it's not your homestead. You wouldn't need to file a dwelling use attestation either, because on the grand list, remember, you wouldn't have a dwelling unit. So, there would be no duty to have to report that as a,
We
well,
did a
the
lot
use.
of work with farms and farm vacation destination tourism. And I remember doing current use work because I'm gonna put up 3 or 4 cabins. And they would be short-term rentals, right?
They could be,
If they had kitchen facilities, but if you went up to the farmhouse to eat, then they wouldn't.
yeah, under these definitions we have,
They got
there's going to be properties that are not dwelling units, even though you might think of it as a short term, because it doesn't have, for instance, its own separate means of ingress or egress, or it doesn't have its own separate, place for cooking. Right?
Well, you get a microwave and a coffee pot in most, in a refrigerator in most motel rooms.
But motel rooms, that motels are clearly business.
Yeah.
So those would.
But
be
I'm just
non-homestead,
wondering,
non-residential.
I am channeling Senator Starr.
I,
If those farmers put a coffee pot and a microwave and a mini fridge in their cabin, are those getting charged? I mean, that,
these,
I'll just throw that at the tax.
this is an area where the tax department will have to do some interpretation.
Yeah,
And unless, I mean, there's still time, obviously, to flesh this out further in future legislative sessions. That might be something to have on your mind going into conference committee, is that even if you don't love the definitions, there's still time.
I think the definitions are good. There's just always gonna be something.
There is always gonna be something, there's the one something I would flag for you and say is,
Need some WD.
I know.
I have to send an email.
I will say I did talk to this earlier.
You did talk to the.
Yeah,
I
we're putting a work order in.
talked to Charlotte about it. I was like, oh my God, we have to
Bring
fix
in the
this.
WD-40 tomorrow.
Well, I asked if they just had
Right.
WD-40 and they did, so they had to have it for 4 days.
All right.
So-
like inches. I stood over there.
Oh, it's gotta be.
It wakes us up though.
Sorry, kids.
Sneak in. All right.
you show you Charles.
Okay. So,
So the thing I would flag for you is, these things all come together in a logical way, but there are some still questions about, dwelling units. And it could be helpful. One thing we don't have is, like a clear provision stating something like, if you're regulated as a lodging establishment, like a hotel would be, that you will not be considered non-homestead residential, because that is not as clear as it could be, and that would be one area where I could see things being interpreted in a way in which people are not happy with the outcome.
because I haven't heard it lately, but there was a lot when we first started looking at some health safety regulations for B&B, short-term rentals. There was a lot of concern from the B&Bs that are regulated, and if they so much as serve a donut for breakfast, they have all kinds of health reforms, and you know, they have a lot of regulation which put them at a competitive disadvantage to somebody that's renting out.
So the
tent
short-term
back
rental
here.
surcharge that we have have that provision stating that if it's a lodging establishment, then the surcharge would apply.
Okay,
So that's one thing that I had in mind.
that will make them happy.
What about the flashcards? Would they be helpful? Remember, we needs had flashcards.
Flash,
Emily mentioned this or.
The Wasting Needs had flashcards to quiz each other on how well they knew it, but really it was just quizzing me because I had to decide if they were right or wrong.
So
But yeah,
you don't want us to bring the flashcard on here.
I mean, hopefully, I passed the test the first time, I hope I can do it again. So, yeah,
just with constituents.
Right, for the floor report, we bring them out. For members of the committee.
We are
So-
allowed to have demonstrations.
for non-homestead residential, that means that it's a parcel or portion of a parcel with a dwelling unit that is not a homestead, not rented out long-term, we've covered this. Also, it carves out mobile homes, even if they are a second home or something. And then we have, and also, by the way, that definition said, like, it specifies, but not including other types of manufactured homes. So,
Okay, but other types of manufactured homes.
you know, the tiny home that you order.
Okay, I'm
Have delivered.
thinking, but manufactured homes, and I'm looking for the realtors that can be built. You see them going down the street all the time. They're stick-built homes.
Yeah.
They're built in a factory in East Montpelier, brought out and put on a foundation.
And those would not be allowed the mobile home
Yeah,
exemption.
they're not called mobile
basically.
homes.
No, they are not, but
Those could
they
be,
are,
but
they
they're
are called
manufactured.
manufactured homes.
Yes.
But mobile homes are sometimes called manufactured.
Yeah, that's why we make that distinction here.
So, okay, as long as that distinction is clear.
And so that brings us to mixed use, which is some of the trickier parts for people to figure out. So mixed use parcels, a parcel with two or more portions qualifying as different classifications shall be classified proportionally as followed. The building part. Let's say we have the bakery with a short-term rental over it, that would be a possibly common, or not a bakery, but any kind of retail or any kind of commercial business with a short-term rental over it. So you have for the building part, it will be classified proportionally based on the percentage of finished floor space used. That will be in the dwelling use attestation. There'll be the short-term rental part of it will be a dwelling unit, and the owner would report in the dwelling use attestation the floor space and then the percentage of that floor space that's used for the short-term rental. So under this, you would say it's 60% commercial space, 40% short-term rental. That's how they would report it. So for the building part, the value of the building would be divided 40% taxed as non-homestead residential, 60% of the value taxed as.
And if the owner lived on the third floor, it would just be divided up.
If the owner lives on the third floor and declares it's a homestead, then actually it's different.
Oh, okay.
Because then, well, let me go to my easier
Okay,
example
keep going.
first. For the land, for the 60-40, the value of the land would also be split 60-40. So it's tied to the floor space usage. Is the way that this is written. Homestead is different because if there's a homestead on the parcel, then under current treatment for homesteads, all the land would also be treated as a homestead.
Okay,
So it would be quite favorable under the system to have a portion of the parcel used as a homestead, which for a lot of people align with the policy goal of having more properties used as homesteads. In that case, the business use of it under the homestead law would then be declared to the department for the business use part of it, and then that would be given its classification.
And if there's an Airbnb on the second floor, there's a business on the first, Airbnb on the second, residential on the third. Would the building be 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 of those uses but the property would all be homestead?
Yes.
Okay,
And then the treatment becomes different when you have more than 25% floor space used for business purpose.
Okay.
I'd refresh myself on that.
It's just our first walkthrough.
Okay, so I think we covered the mixed use. And we covered some, those, what we just talked about would be flashcard things. And then there's a lot of language within this to be clear that, you know, like I just said, the land surrounding a homestead will be classified as a homestead, you know, in accordance with the homestead definition. And I said this before in the joint hearing, but every place where we're talking about homestead here, we're sticking with current law and trying to put in provisions to be clear that when it comes to homesteads, things won't change. And there's some changes to the homestead definitions to make it clear that these definitions for tax classification are not going to affect current law on homesteads, and vice versa. Subdivision 4 here tries to get at a issue that currently exists for some homesteads that have a business use going on. And that's when you use the same floor space for more than one purpose. Which one do you count it as? The way that it's resolved under this language, and this was in Act 73, it says the use for which the floor space is most often used shall be considered the primary use. And so when it comes to the classification, it would be put down in the classification for however it's most often used primary use. And again, this is reported by the property owners themselves on the dwelling use attestation. It's something that is hard to imagine the state is ever going to be in a position to
Check out.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking of people who sell online. They have a computer on a desk. It's a business. More or less, depending on how.
And I would guess even under current law, when it comes to homestead declaration, different homeowners are going to make a different call, whether they even mention that as being.
Which most of them don't even think of it. If you had a showroom, they would, but. Yeah. Okay.
So subsection E goes to forms for the commissioner to do this, including dwelling use attestation, which there's law and then we'll go over. There's provision, this was in Act 73 also, about current use and how this is not intended to change anything under current use. Subsection G appeals, we mentioned maybe revisiting things in the future. I think this is most in need of revisiting probably. What we have right now is for subdivision 1, persons aggrieved by a decision of the assessing official relating to how property is classified. For taxation purposes under the section, may appeal in the manner provided for property valuation appeals under this title. And then subdivision 2 is appeals of a decision of the commissioner to classify property shall be made to the commissioner. What this is getting at is if you're appealing something related to tax classification that was a decision of the assessing official, then you would appeal it like property valuation appeal other decisions of assessing officials. If you're appealing your tax classification because you made an attestation in your dwelling use attestation and the commissioner said, we don't think so. And it was the commissioner's decision that changed their classification, then you would appeal to the commissioner. We probably need to devote more, like between Ledge Council and department, probably we need to devote probably some more thought into making sure that this lines up the way that's intended. So
You're gonna appeal to the commissioner for the commissioner's finding.
well, yeah, I mean that's
Sounds a little stacked.
I mean any tax appeal though that you have, you appeal to the commissioner. So that's how we do almost everything when it comes to administrative appeals. And then there's a provision about basically, since there's two different places to appeal to, that if you mistakenly appeal to the wrong one, that it's considered timely, it can be fixed and you're not punished for that. Is solution tree there. But I would flag this as an area in which I would expect, maybe you'll even hear feedback from the department after this. They'll probably think so. Was there a nod? That's it.
There was a head wag.
Okay, so section 59 is some changes to the section of law on the declaration of homestead, adding the dwelling use attestation where appropriate here. There's also penalties that go along with this, but it's being streamlined a bit. The way this is intended to work is if you, well, I'll just read it. So the new language under the homestead will say, if the property identified in a declaration under subsection B of this section is not the taxpayer's homestead, the commissioner shall notify the municipality and the municipality shall issue a corrected tax bill. And that will come with a 5% penalty. What's being removed here is, or if the owner of a homestead fails to declare a homestead as required. So essentially, there's not a punishment for failure to file a homestead. Part of this is the presumption that it's in your favor, more so than under current law, it should be in your favor to file a homestead declaration. So the penalty wouldn't be for failure to file, it would be for filing that you shouldn't have.
Maybe somewhere in here, but when we said, I guess we are setting the tax rates like at 1.5. Yeah.
It's not in here yet.
It's not in here, but so that will do away with the problem we have now, where for some people, the non-homestead rate in their town is lower than the homestead rate. So we will be fixing that issue.
That's the rationale with making these adjustments to the penalties.
Yeah.
Where you're already essentially being punished if you fail to file when you should have. So there's not a penalty for that. Just like dwelling use attestation has the same rationale when we get to that, where if you fail to file, you will, and there's a dwelling unit, that means you'll get the
second.
You'll get the second home and you'll get the higher rate.
We went, when we first did homestead declarations, every year there was a heart-wrenching story about somebody who'd been with their child on their deathbed and didn't get their homestead declaration in on time, and I think we moved the appeals date 3 or 4 times. Now I think you've got almost a year, and then there's no no penalty. But yeah, there will, and I mean, at some point you have to say, this is it.
And so I would flag that there is a risk here. So as you can see how this is set up, there's not a penalty for failure to file anymore. Your penalty is, for one, if you should have filed a homestead, that means dwelling unit, probably. It doesn't have to be dwelling unit, actually. You can declare, like you might live somewhere right now in a dwelling that doesn't meet that definition we talked about.
Right, but if you're living
But if
there
it meets
full
that
time,
definition and it's dwelling unit, and you fail to file, not only would you not get the homestead favorable
Right.
treatment, but you would get the second home most likely, the treatment
Yeah.
and classification.
So that's your penalty.
That's your penalty, and there is a concern though that
there will
it's
be
a known issue that people who don't have to file income taxes because they don't have a high enough income, that's the best opportunity to file a homestead declaration, and if that is missed, those are the people who tend to, under our current system, not file homestead declarations and therefore not get the benefits and not get property tax credits. And so there is a risk that that problem could be worse if we don't do more about.
Yeah, we're gonna have to set up something with the agency on aging and the economic, the CBCAC, who's caps, to get that word out. Because in many cases, those are the folks who are least able to pay an increase. And yes, some of them will call us and we will try to fix it. And it just keeps spiraling. There is always someone who misses. And maybe we should set up an appeals board for that.
So there is a provision added here that the Department of Taxes will at least be able to get it corrected unilaterally. There's a problem. So there is a provision here. So if the
Okay.
owner else aware, but that would mean the commissioner's made aware of it somehow, like maybe
Okay.
through an assessing official or something. It's so
Senator.
we have that.
We called their senator.
They'll call their senator
Yeah.
or rep.
Then we start to get into, correcting homesteads and homestead declarations and dwelling use attestations. So they'll follow a very similar process. Including having the hardship option, or if you filed incorrectly, but it was due to hardship. The same thing that exists for homestead declarations exists for dwelling use attestations.
Yeah.
Those are most of the things that we've had
Mhm.
concerns based on.
So yeah, so adding dwelling use attestations to some of those options are good for homestead declarations, and then subsection M here is the bulk of the new law addressing the dwelling use attestation process. So annually honored before the due date for filing income tax return without extension, just like homestead declaration, each owner of a property with dwelling unit that's not declared as a homestead may file though. The may is because if you just know that it's a second homestead, then you can do nothing. May file a dwelling use attestation. Again, I would draw your attention to, by the way, a property with a dwelling unit. So again, it's just a business and there's no dwelling units. There's no need to file anything. May file a dwelling use attestation describing how the dwelling unit will be used in the current year for purposes of assigning a tax classification. And properties with a dwelling unit for which no homestead declaration and attestation have been filed shall be assigned the tax classification with the highest statewide education tax rate multiplier. Presumably that means the second home rate. The commissioner may collect any information through the attestation as needed.
Kirby, how many more pages?
We only have about 4 more.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
I want to at least give Rebecca, since she's sitting here, a chance.
Oh, right.
Damien has a hard stop at 4:30. So we're gonna go for 10 more minutes. You get us
Okay.
4 pages and.
Yes.
Are we gonna take a little breather here after?
I'm trying to, Damien has to,
No break for you.
I'll take a nap.
I would say just take them as you need them.
Okay, great.
Because I'm working on time issues and
No, that's fine.
staffing schedules and trying to get everyone in. Trying to get us out of here before 5:30.
The party's not gonna last that long, so
Yeah. So be nice to.
I was kidding, that's good.
What are you going to? You got a script?
There's provisions here on fraud and how there's a 100% penalty in cases of fraudulent return or filing. And then there's the transition provisions in section 60. So for calendar year 2026, Department of Taxes will create forms and or amend existing homestead declarations to gather the information necessary to start setting up the classification system. And this is, there's gonna be a data collection effort before all of this comes online and is the law. So the first year will be the sort of first run at dwelling use attestations that are not necessarily going to be the same thing thereafter. And then in section 61, we have repeals for parts of Act 73 that are all being replaced here. All the same contingencies that were in Act 73 related to tax classifications continue to exist, including there's this intent section about rate multipliers that you will basically think about tax classifications and whether you should make any changes or adjustments at the same time that you set those tax rate multipliers eventually. It's not being done now, though. And then there's the prospective repeal you should be aware of. So this says in absence of legislative action on or before July 1, 2030 that creates a new tax rate multiplier, the main section relating to tax classifications would be repealed.
Okay, so that's the current law would be repealed.
Act 73 set the multipliers,
Yes, it did.
but they're all at one. So you need to
Yes.
revisit.
Okay, those are the multipliers.
And so if you don't revisit and actually set different rates,
Then they all stay as one.
then it's repealed.
Oh.
Which doesn't happen.
What is the rationale for needing that?
This was part of the negotiations last year with the executive branch.
Yeah, this was in.
They did have that, I believe when the bill originally came over, it had a differential rate in it for second homes. And then there was the ensuing discussion about what it would take. And we were specifically asked not to start it, so we left the base in. But we were asked not to put it into effect until this year.
There was some discussion of ways and means about wanting to wait to set these to try to align them with some of the other ed changes, such as there's in John's sections here, there's the homestead. The like new way of doing the property tax credit, that's the homestead exemption. And to possibly try to set these rates in a way in which you have the higher second home rate paid for the homestead exemption.
That would-
So if you want
that
to do that, then you don't know that information yet, so you have to set the rate, the multipliers later to do that.
We don't know how much in second homes or the value are out there.
I just want to put a pin in this for the committee. I really support this, and what I'm going to ask for when it comes to the foundation formula for very similar reasons. I would like to see a prospective repeal of the sections of Act 73 passed related to the foundation formula requiring an affirmative legislative action to not have those sections be repealed because of the same uncertainties I have. And I've been talking with John Gray about this. It's something that I'll be putting on the table as we continue to.
Okay, lost me, but we'll.
I want to see it sunset the foundation formula.
Sunset.
Sunset the foundation formula.
Okay.
Let's be of our own teach.
I think it's a whole state issue.
Okay.
So one thing on this that you could be aware of though is the department's report for classifications did actually have a section to sort of give, it was a very early estimate for some of the ways that you can, and it was a requirement, they didn't do it voluntarily, it was a requirement under S73, but they give you some suggestions for setting tax rate multipliers. So there's some information out there already that you can look at. And then the last part here is making conforming adjustments to the homestead, just to line up with the things we talked about. And also to make clear that, nothing with tax classifications is affecting homesteads and how that's treated. So that's it for me.
Because we're not gonna restart state aid for school construction. We did that, yes. Okay, any questions for Kirby at this point? If not, Rebecca, do you have anything?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can be quick. Well, we try to be quick.
Maybe we can.
Thank you.
Yeah, three.
Rebecca Samara, the Deputy Commissioner for Vermont Department of Taxes, and I did actually look up some slides for like. I'll try to share. As well. Okay. Hey, look at that. Okay. That was awesome. Kirby.
Can you share that with Charlotte eventually?
Yes. Oh, you know, Charlotte.
Well, we'll just post it on the website so we can refer back to it.
I think I have an email draft started too that I didn't launch yet. I'm not gonna try to do
That's
that. I'll send it to you right afterwards. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we just have a couple items that I'd love to bring to this committee for consideration. That's an excellent walkthrough, Kirby, and really helpful for getting myself received in all of this as well. Should like borrow you for our first year of hearings on what's a second home, what's not. It sounds like you got it. Okay, so I'm just gonna jump in here to, this is kind of a big one, I'll just say. This is in the reappraisal section, sections 30 to 54. We actually have a pretty substantive request here to strike the moratoriums that are currently in the H955 bill, and then also the moratoriums and the underlying language in Act 73 right now. And these are like moratoriums on towns initiating contracts with reappraisal companies, and they were kind of meant to be a kind of like steps to ending the current municipality by municipality reappraisal system as we move toward the regional one. But we have this request now because we feel like we really need to adapt this approach as we kind of have like a moving target of when school districts might be realized. This approach of having these moratoriums towards a date certain was when we thought there was going to be more of a.
We have a moratorium for a date certain, but we don't have a date certain for when the new districts would go in, and the regional assessment districts are supposed to align with the school district. So you don't want to end you don't want to end local things until you know. All right.
Yeah, and we're like just like starting to realize the gains of having the 6-year cycle active. We have definitely had an uptick in reappraisal activity, and just right now in real time we're fielding questions from municipalities who are like, so like what's up with this? And so these moratoriums kicked in January of 2028 in this language, but then in the underlying Act 73, it's actually January of 2027. So, just for providing some,
They did repeal that section.
yeah, so that's actually one section of the underlying bill that isn't privy to any of the bigger contingencies that drop some things out of statute. So it's just
right, we added that kind of as not an afterthought, but it was a separate box brought in to us. It wasn't really connected with the whole education reform. It was reappraisal reform. Okay.
Thanks. It looks like the moratorium in Act 73, the moratorium on reappraisals is repealed in here from Act 73. Because I thought I heard you say repeal them both. It says transition provisions. Does that include the moratorium?
Right. This is like a bit of a, I don't know if you call it belt and suspenders. Like, I don't want to really imagine a world where, we don't have the H55 that moves forward. But, if that situation happens and we're only left with what's in law, except with Act 73 unamended, then we'll have a moratorium that's effective January 27.
Okay.
Which is.
So where is the moratorium in here specifically? What page is it?
So let's see.
I just need to mark my drafts.
Page nine.
Sure. Thank you, Kirby.
And is it true that this does repeal the moratorium from Act 73 or not?
It does both. It repeals the old, but then it replaces it. So I think what Rebecca's saying is, yes, repeal, also don't replace.
I totally know what's happening. Okay, let's move through this because I've got to get to Damien.
So that'd be great for the committee to consider, providing a little more certainty there.
Take this up, we get there.
2 requests related to second homes classification. So one is, it's actually, one of the rare times that, I would love to do a report back to the legislature. We have some classifications appeal language in the, bill currently, but this was like very much a work in progress and, something that, back on the House side, they had been, like requesting feedback from tax and, while we're working on what our implementation plan is gonna be, we just didn't feel ready to like put language in statute. We would love the opportunity to bring back a appeal process recommendation around classifications to the 2029 session. I think that timing is like, gives plenty of time before that dwelling use attestation form is actually, like carrying water, influencing people's tax rates. We'd actually have a whole year after that of administering it in kind of more of a pro forma state. It'll still be the old system, but folks will have 1 year of reporting dwelling usage on this new form so that we can even like, come back with even more technical recommendations in 2030 after that. Oops. Apologies. But yeah, so striking the classifications appeals language and either you want something to put in place, so happy to report back. Or it's just a priority for us too, so we will be coming back whether you ask us for a report or not.
That's a lot to strike. There's a whole bunch of language in here about appeals.
I wouldn't call it placeholder language, but it's certainly not ready for prime time.
She's talking about classifications, not the RAD.
Yes, yeah.
RAD appeals is there's a lot.
Oh,
It's all in section 58.
Section 15, okay, sorry.
No, totally. I should clarify that.
Like, whoa, that's a
Reasonable.
lot.
Okay, let's.
Request number 2, you may have heard this one from Jake Feldman before, who I should say, by the way, I have some colleagues like waiting in the wings to beam in over Zoom if there's follow-up questions.
Okay.
I can't handle. But I know we're trying to.
Back at 4:30.
Yeah, move quick. So this is an ask that you might remember from Jake. Our request is that commercial apartment buildings, those with more than 5 units, are treated as they are today in the grand list as business property. Which would mean that landlords of these units would not be required to fill out a dwelling use attestation where they specify the use of every single one of the units.
Okay.
This is just gonna, especially for big apartment buildings, this is gonna create a really big lift for those landlords, for the department and for local listers. We don't, it's the juice worth the squeeze type of question, especially for like the first year or years of this new cumbersome tax treatment. We're gonna have, if say like 2 units in a 20-unit apartment building don't meet the definition of a long-term rental, then, procedurally, the landlord's gonna have to, identify, which of these 2 units are, not meeting those, and then the town's gonna have to apportion building value and underlying land value prorated to like account for how much is in non-homestead residential and how much is in residential. And like all, our conversations with housing data folks are that it seems like large apartment buildings are not really the place where folks are doing Airbnbs or having their second homes, for out of staters. Like, so I think, it just adds a lot of process
Or
for.
at least already out, that would be something you would recommend we do, and then we can always revisit it
Yeah,
if we find out that is happening more than we.
absolutely. Yeah, like this is, I think we will find, things we can't even anticipate now. This classifications framework is something that if enacted will get built on over time, and we'll get more complex, I'm sure, over time. But, starting to make it like a little bit more administrable, we're already pretty intimidated. Honestly, would be great.
Okay.
There is a new abatement program, Kirby walked through in section 55. This is like flagging is quite problematic for us at the department, especially colleagues in PBR. So right now there's an abatement, as Kirby described, there's an abatement process. It takes place after like the normal property valuation appeals process has ended. Totally discretionary for municipalities, boards of abatement, which is a little different than, which is different than the boards of civil authority that are part of the formal appeals process. So, a couple concerns here. We anticipate there'd be a high volume of abatement requests. Like, so what this program does is basically say that, if there's an abatement because of a clear, obvious error or mistake on the part of a lister, then the municipality doesn't owe ed tax on that property either. That is the outcome if something goes successfully through an appeals process where there's, due process, there's review and oversight. These processes, don't have that level of state oversight. And we already find today that a lot of fodder that would have been for the appeals process lands in these abatement review, or the abatement processes just because someone missed, they weren't hip to the appeals process timeline. So they missed that and they're like, okay, I'm going to go for an abatement then, and, with mixed success, it's not a process that we at the state are involved with now, but we do get pings about them often, from municipalities looking for guidance on things. So we're concerned about a high volume of these requests, and the fiscal impact seems really troubling. We think it could be quite significant. I think it was framed as being de minimis. We haven't been brought into testimony on this yet to date. It just kind of emerged in this bill, and I'm not sure what the policy.
I think with that, I'm trying to keep moving, so.
Okay.
We will be coming back to every one of these.
Okay, great.
As long as we've got them in writing.
Okay, awesome. So
we know. So
great.
we got
That's an
another
easy
one.
one. Also, something that we haven't had an opportunity or a request to testify on yet. There was an interactive funding calculator added as a floor amendment on the House as this bill came out of the House. So I think, I don't know, I'd be interested in to be involved in more engagement on this, because as drafted, we're responsible for hosting this on our website, just fine. I'm always happy to help, but it doesn't use tax department data. And the ask actually, I think.
Okay, that is noted.
Okay. I'm worried it's gonna muddy things, and I have concerns of hosting a muddying data product on our site that maybe,
I don't think we want people going online and.
Yeah, would be happy to come back in and chat more about the concerns here and some of the duplicative nature of this ask. And this one's really, really quick. This is on behalf of Jill, PBR director. Section 56 added a task for the PBR director to proactively put out some guidance on mobile manufactured home parks organized as cooperatives. We just requested this get struck as unnecessary because this is very much part of PDR's duties and Jill's duties. And we already have plans in the work to update the lister handbook with specific guidance. And this would just, live in statute forever as one of her 11 duties, which seems a little outsized for just already kind of being part of her job.
I'm gonna give you 2 minutes.
I think this is the end.
That's it. Okay.
Thank you so much.
We
You're welcome.
will have you back as we start. Mark it up if we ever get that far. Then take the testimony on sections. But Damien is here. And last night, I think we ended up screaming at each other. It was not our best evening. And I think
Spirited debate.
it was a spirited debate, yes. Think the vote was that we will do EV mileage fee and the hybrid. Sounds like it was a straw poll, which led to screen. I don't think it was. I remember being specifically asked what my vote was. Okay, so I think I am counting this as 5 that were prepared to do that on the straw poll.
What's that?
What's
that?
Yeah, exactly. That only doing the combustible and they only do the plug-in EVs and the plug-in hybrids.
EVs and plug-in EVs, yeah.
EVs and plug-in.
Yeah, so hold on.
Wait, you've lost me.
You have,
What EVs?
so
don't
plug-in electric
plug in?
vehicles include battery electric vehicles. That's what we call EVs. Plug-in hybrid electric vehicles.
That's
Hybrid
what I
electric
got.
vehicles, which are mild hybrids, like your old fashioned Prius that didn't plug into the wall. And those include everything from full-size trucks to, regular Toyota Corollas these days. And then they're also fuel efficient gasoline, like regular internal combustion vehicles that get 40 miles a gallon, which may exceed the mileage of plug-in hybrids and mild hybrids in many instances, depending on the size of the vehicle. So you can have a plug-in hybrid that gets 25 miles a gallon and a mild hybrid that gets 50. So that's something to keep in mind here. And you can have an internal combustion engine that gets 40 as well as one that gets 12.
Yeah, no,
So-
Barry told me the other day I got 85. No, of course, by the time I went back up the hill, I was down to 35.
Once upon a time coming from Killington back to Burlington, I got 63 in my diesel, but that was back before we found out what was happening with the diesel.
Yeah.
So it was one of those VWs. So, but anyway,
Yeah.
so I'm not sure what the request is here. Are you trying to narrow down the expansion in 2029 and then eliminate the expansion in 2031? That's my understanding.
I'm looking.
Wait, what?
I mean, so that's what was, I think what Senator Chittenden was describing there was just plug-in hybrids. Okay, plug-in, so EVs, battery electric EVs and plug-in hybrid electrics currently, if I'm not mistaken, pay an extra registration fee of $180 and $89 for battery electric, $44.50 for plug-in hybrid. 2 years, it's twice that. Okay, yeah, so my understanding would be to take basically those vehicles and migrate them to a mileage-based usage fee. Is that what the plan is? The proposal is beginning next January 1st to take just battery electric, regular EVs and migrate them to mileage-based user fee. The proposal out of Senate Transportation in 2029 is to take plug-in hybrid, mild hybrid, and internal combustion that get better than 25 miles per gallon on the EPA's combined estimated fuel efficiency. So that's the EPA's formula for mixing your city and highway mileage. And then anything below 25 would not be included. And then there would be a credit provided for based on your combined efficiency for the fuel tax that you're estimated to have paid in the past year.
And
There's a third step, right?
And then the third step in 2031 would be all light duty vehicles, again, with the credit applied for the fuel tax. The bill includes a cap as well of $178. So Senator Matos,
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
that's totally fine.
Senator Matos yesterday was mentioning that if you have a F-150 with a gross vehicle weight rating of like 9,500 pounds, and then an F-250 that gets you up to 10,500 pounds. So not a huge difference in the weight rating for the vehicles, which is basically what the manufacturer says. This is your safe loaded weight, maximum safe loaded weight. For the 10,500 pound vehicle, there'd be no cap and fuel tax. For the way the 9,500 pound vehicle is, they would still pay their fuel tax. You don't get a rebate or a refund for the tax you paid at the pump, because that's built into the price that you pay at the pump. But you get a zero mileage based user fee. And so then there becomes sort of this question that he was raising about fairness at that threshold, but that's 2031 when you get to
Isn't
that.
there also a provision in the bill that asks for a report or recommendations
So
about
regardless of,
transitioning those heavier vehicles?
yeah, regardless of what you do with the
phased implementation. If you decided to take out the required phasing at this point, there's still a report with a plan on how to bring in what we were saying, using the shorthand of fuel efficient vehicles when we were talking about it across the hall. In 2029, and then all light duty in 2031. So the way the bill is drafted, it has that report. And then separately, it has the changes to the definition, which would do the phasing without the details filled in.
And
So that's basically the plan provides the details that would then need to be enacted, or you would need to push out the implementation dates, one or the other.
where I saw the committee coming down yesterday was drawing the line at the plan and doing the EVs only this year. And I believe Michelle was there this year. The department said that that's what they would prefer, so that they would have time to assess how that went and then build out the plan from there. I have some concern that asking people to, my first instinct is I'm going up by a big pickup truck. Because sending all forms back and forth and in and out is a lot. Just more of an annoyance than just paying at the pump. It's done with. And I don't think we want to encourage people to buy lower mileage vehicles.
If I may, Madam Chair, Michelle Boomhauer, Vermont Agency of Transportation. I just want to clarify that with the $50+ million investment we made in the DMV system, no individual person is going to be doing any forms of any type. They will just be getting a bill from us that says, we calculated all this in our complex computer system based on everything in your bin. And here is, how it worked out.
Okay.
So I just want to make sure nobody's.
Because they keep saying you get a form and you send a form in and you get a rebate if you only drove 10 miles a month. Yeah.
And there's no benefit to buying in terms of the cost.
No, they're gonna do it all and I don't
Yeah,
have to do 3 or 4 mails. That makes sense.
What's the appeals process in the event that you get a bill from DMV and it's wrong?
The bill has an appeals process built into the assessment. You have a period to appeal. There's an administrative appeal first. If you disagree with the department's finding on the administrative appeal, you have the right, just like you would for any other fee or tax in the state. Well, I shouldn't say for any other fee, but for any tax to appeal to the Superior Court. And then go through the judicial system if you think the state is exceeding its authority or misconstruing the law, something like that. And that is built in actually for any final decision of the department in this. There's the opportunity for an individual to appeal if they disagree with it. And they can start with an administrative appeal so they don't have to go out and lawyer up and deal with court filings. But if they think the department is not administering the law properly, they can go into the court system and have an independent third party rule.
If an administrative appeal, are there any timelines included in that?
Yeah, within the bill itself, let me just pull up the draft here so I don't get this wrong. Guys have got a lot of drafts. So the appeals process provides 45 days. So a person may, within 45 days after an assessment is mailed, appeal the amount of the assessment to the commissioner. And then the commissioner is required to establish procedures for filing and hearing the appeals that are consistent with the existing law for DMV appeals, which is set out in sections 105 through 107 of Title 23. It includes the ability to set up a hearing officer and to have a simplified appeal process where you don't need to have an attorney present. But then after that, you get the right to judicial review if you're still not satisfied with the outcome.
In the administrative appeals so far, are there any timeline requirements or guidelines?
Within the administrative appeals themselves, so I apologize, just pulling up the statutes that underlie. And so the appeals process provides that you need at least 5 days notice of the date for the hearing. And then within the hearing process itself, a written request, so this actually extends the normal process by 30 days. So normally you have only 15 days to appeal. Under this, you have 45. Within the process itself, though, there is no specific time between the filing of the appeal and the date the commissioner has to set the hearing. That's specifically set out, and it provides the commissioner has to set up the process for that.
Has to set out the process.
Yeah, that
Through
to
the
be.
rules, through administrative rules?
No, it can be a procedure, so it doesn't require administrative rulemaking. So the commissioner is directed to establish procedures. In the event that the public wants the procedures to be codified, there is a process under the Administrative Procedures Act where the public can petition and force the commissioner of DMV to adopt a rule that sets out the appeal process and rules.
And there's no response requirement in terms of getting a response to the appeal?
The process here requires that it basically requires that the commissioner has the authority to determine the rules and procedures for the hearing. The commissioner, I think if the commissioner is not hearing the appeal, then we'll either be back here or you'll be in court seeking an order requiring the commissioner to have hearing.
Okay,
The court has authority to issue that kind of order.
we've only got Damien for 6 more minutes. And I think if we want to start getting into writing an appeals process,
The
we probably should do a floor amendment.
I will say that in the House and Senate Transportation Committees, the original proposal had a much more extensive appeals process mapped out based on the gasoline fuel taxes. The sense in those committees was that versus the fuel taxes where you're dealing with a distributor that is distributing tens of thousands of gallons per month and filing returns on that. In this case, you're talking about 2 odometer readings, one at the beginning of the period, one at the end, and a single rate that is multiplied by those. And then with the introduction of vehicles that purchase fuel tax, there will be one additional calculation, which is the difference between the 2 odometer readings divided by the EPA's fuel economy for the vehicle, multiplied by the amount per gallon. So there's 2 calculations max. It is simpler than, pretty much any other tax the state does in terms of the calculations. And the sense across the hall was not to provide a complicated appeals process. Of course, it's your right to change that So
I'm ready to make a motion on, I would think.
Okay,
So did you
Can I ask a quick question? Do you remember, Damien, did the bill come to us on a unanimous bipartisan vote from Senate Transportation?
I believe so. I'm seeing Michelle nodding her head, and I know she would have been paying attention to the votes. But yes, I believe so.
And I'm gonna look to Damien, but my understanding was we were going to, Damien, you said you could do it by doing a section so and so. That when we were talking about this yesterday,
I sent you two different versions,
yeah,
draft 1.1 and draft 2.1, I believe.
and 1.1 stopped with the study we did.
Yep.
The EVs and the study, and everything else was, and plus the jet fuel and taking out all the transfers and.
Yep. So I can show you
Yeah.
1.1 right now.
But I just want to see, is the committee still there?
I'm not, I never was.
No, you never were. I had it as 2-5 yesterday.
Well, I'm in favor of taking out the jet fuel thing and the stuff that we need to do for the property, the other stuff, but what?
Purchase.
The purchase and use, thank you. But I mean, I would prefer to stay with the construct under that the transportation committee did for this. I think it makes sense. It's phased in. It sounds even easier to administer than when we were first told about it. And there's a system in place that makes it, it's easy now.
So
It puts everyone on
I
the
am
same
feeling better about that. But I've got 3 minutes, so Damien, if you can put out what number 1, I'm looking for a motion.
Where are you at?
I begin with Senator Party. I'm comfortable now with this mileage back. So it's got sent over from
Okay,
the transportation.
all right.
But we're not even. That's not what we're doing right now.
Let's draft 2.1.
So there's draft 1.1
is. Spinning on also.
1.1 just says EV.
Yes.
2.1 keeps the MBUF construct that was sent over. Both of them get rid of the purchase and use tax provisions and the jet fuel surcharge provisions.
Okay,
So
I need a motion, 1.1.
I will move
2.1.
I will move, draft 2.1, which is that would amend, the transportation bill. Or by deleting the fuel tax, or the jet fuel tax and the, purchase and use provisions,
Okay.
right? That's the 2.1.
Yes, Senator Hardy has moved that we approve version 2.1, which starts the EV mileage tax and then includes the movement going forward with going to mileage fees overall. Okay, is there further discussion? Further amendment? Yes.
No, I'll just say I'm not in support of that, and I am gonna hold strong on my position of if you plug your vehicle in, that should be part of the MBUF, because they're paying nothing or little towards the gas tax. I'd like to just phase that in right now, see how it goes, then work on the gas or that.
I'll just, for discussion, I have a similar line, so I'm gonna be voting no on this. I'm gonna go to this.
And I would roll a plug in there too about getting rid of the cap of $178, because if it is strictly a mileage-based user fee, there should be no cap
Okay.
of $178.
So if you want to put an event for that, I'd support that.
All right, right now we have a motion to do floor minutes.
Yeah.
Any further discussion? If not, we'll call the roll.
Senator Shipman.
No.
Senator Beck,
Yes.
Senator Hardy,
Yes.
Senator Brock,
No.
Senator Hewlett,
Yes.
Senator, oh, me, Matt Bessie, no. Senator Cummings,
No.
3-4-0.
Okay.
Can we now move 1.1?
You can now read that one. It's gone down. 3, 4, 3, 4, right? That's like 7. So now you can go.
I would move favorably House Bill 944 with draft amendment 1.1 dated 4/23/2026, 10:13 a.m.
Okay, further discussion on that one. That puts into effect the EV and the study, jet fuel and all the plate with the ed fund. Okay. No further discussion. Will the clerk call the roll?
Need a new sheet?
I think so.
You got a new sheet?
And Senator, where does this leave the, gasoline? Gasoline vehicles.
It's study.
Yeah, so there's just a report back on a plan to bring them in, but they will not be brought in unless you take action.
Yeah, will require further legislative action to move this forward. Okay, further discussion? Clerk can call the roll.
Senator Chitner,
Yes.
Senator Beck,
Yes.
Senator Hardy,
No.
Senator Brock,
Yes.
Senator Hewlett,
Nope.
Senator Meadows, yes, Senator Cummings.
Yes. So that
5-2.
passes 4-2-0.
But
5, that's right, that makes sense. 5-2-0. It's late. Damien is late. Thank you, Damien.
Thank you for your time.
If we get a clean copy, who would like to report? Yeah, would like to report that.
You're taking it?
Yeah, I'll do it, unless you want it, man.
No, I'll be there right behind you.
I was getting sent to a sign.
Draft 1.1 already?
I do.
Okay, great. So you don't need a new
Okay.
copy. Great.
I think that's it.
Thank you for your
Did you want to talk about the amendments again with Chris, or is that also?
Amendments.
That's just.
Yeah. Becca White's amendment. Okay.
Oh, no, we should hear from Chris on that.
What would you like to hear from Chair?
It's gonna hit the floor tomorrow. Can we take a 5-minute break?
That'd be great.
You do that